Hi, my name is Ophi YouTube Videos. I am a lesbian and a feminist, and I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things. This video actually was meant to be my first one ever, if that gives you some level of idea about just how much I care about this story. However, once I started actually making videos, I realized I wanted to do this story justice, which meant I wanted to learn how to make better videos first, so I spent about 10 months doing that. This is why this video, which I was referring to in last September and October as a World AIDS Day project, is now coming out in June. Not just in June during Pride Month, though, but in June on the day of the previews for a Broadway stage musical that is being mounted about the scam artist that I have been researching for the last 10 months. This musical will be called Angel of Arkansas. It is currently in its second round of previews, and it apparently will be coming out next year and severely threatens, in my opinion, to enter Ruth Coker Burks from being kind of a known thing in the back of a lot of gay people's heads into potentially becoming some kind of gay household name, which is kind of the nightmare route for this scenario. I don't believe Ruth Coker Burks deserves any more notoriety than she currently has, unless that notoriety is for being a grifter. I go a lot further into that in this video, as well as provide more context for the article that I am about to quote from. But one other thing that has changed between September, when I began to work on this project, and now is unfortunately that one of the people who was quoted in a Today article, which I will be giving you more context for later down the line, has passed away. Daymon Jones was among the first people in the state of Arkansas to be diagnosed with HIV in the 1980s. And he was also one of the first people to speak out against the subject of this video.
He fought against her for years before anybody did back in the 80s and 90s. He didn't make it any qualms about it. He hated her. He hated her because of trying to take the glory. And he didn't want the glory. He didn't want the glory, or they wouldn't be doing it in a basement in someone's home quietly, taking care of HIV people, food pantry. And when I think of history all the way around of the community and the significant part that he played in this, he's probably the main character in the book. When it, and not even mentioned in any way, if that makes sense. The real character of the story was not written in.
And he didn't get a book deal.
And he didn't get a book deal. And you know what? He didn't want one. He fought that whole book idea the whole time. He hated the idea of it because he knew the absolute truth. I knew. He was my best friend. Mike was running the clinic then. And I, when you're there, you're there. And when you're not, you're not.
Daymon Jones fought against HIV as well as multiple forms of cancer for decades, and he also, for more than 20 years, provided service through the Tuggle Shelby Clinic, an HIV clinic that Ruth Coker Burks conveniently pretends does not exist in her tellings of Hot Springs, Arkansas. And in that Today article, he is quoted very clearly not as looking to be the recipient of any of the kind of credit that Ruth receives. Instead, he says,
"It's not my story. It's a story of Hot Springs," he said. "The nuns, the Pentecostal ladies that fed us, took care of us. That's the story that's being missed. It's not my story. I'm a nobody. The people who are not being given any herald because of Ruth Burks are those people, the doctors that volunteered to save us. But my town is not this fucking Dumphole she's trying to make it look like," he said. "Without my town, I would have died."
And like I said, I just the whole finalization and everything falling in place with his transitioning and opening up all that mixed emotions of, am I mad? Am I, because that's the one thing that she did say when I talked to her in that cemetery that day. She actually came right out and said, You talking about Daymon Jones? You mean that SOB ain't dead yet? I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. He was alive, and this was right before, this was in 2019 when she said that. You mean to tell me that? And she didn't spell it. She said it out, angry, bitter, and hateful. You mean that kind of a bitch is still alive? Doesn't sound like any angel I'd want to hang around. I honestly think that she wanted people to die on her watch so that she could take some satisfaction out of that. Because she was not doing anything to protect them, so she had to protect herself. And Daymon Jones had everything that we needed, even though it was short and not sweet. He had everything that we needed to kind of confirm what we already knew. Excuse me. And for that, I'm grateful.
Though we heard wonderful things about Daymon Jones from both Tim Looper and Mike Melancon, who I will get to introduce you to later in this video, my friend Kit and I did not have a chance to speak directly to Daymon Jones for this project. I always hoped that he might see this after we uploaded it and like what we had done, like the way that we let what he said about how Hot Springs really was inform the way that we made this video. Unfortunately, now I don't ever get to know if that would have been the case. I hope that it is. I hope that we have put together something that he would have appreciated and that he would have thought did a good job of laying out what he said in that article. But I wanted to dedicate this video to him, and I wanted to do that not just by putting his name and his date of birth and the day of his passing on the beginning of the video. I wanted to do it by giving him a chance to tell you his version of events before I even present you a version of it that Ruth tries to profit off of. So this is Daymon Jones's experience with Ruth Coker Burks, who he says to Today attempted to get close to him and his partner upon learning that they were both HIV positive.
What really got me riled up was how she does it, he said. She said, well, you know, I can bury you too when you die. Well, Ruth, I have no intention of dying right now, and even if I do, I have a family cemetery. They won't let you in, you know that. Oh, yes, they will. We discussed this already. She tried to use fear to make herself look like she was somebody that was going to help.
This video is dedicated to Daymon Jones, who was telling the truth when he told Ruth he had no intention of dying anytime soon. This video is dedicated to the gay community in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and it is dedicated to Timothy Edward Gentry and Jimmy Gleason Kelly, whose grave marker Ruth Coker Burks left to rot even after she received $75,000 from a GoFundMe for a memorial for the AIDS victims buried in Files Cemetery. And though I was able to confirm far fewer names than I would have liked, this video is dedicated to everybody else who passed away during the AIDS crisis and had to suffer the double indignity of not only having a senseless death, but of having that death later be lumped into an ever-increasing number presented by a con artist. Their losses were already such a tragedy, and it is an injustice to allow Ruth Coker Burks to make herself famous and beloved on the backs of them. I won't let that happen. I hope you won't either. I hope that you'll tell anybody who tells you that they heard about this new AIDS crisis musical that it is actually about a colossal grifter. I have links in the description that you can send to prove that. It doesn't even have to be this video, although it can be, and hi, if that's how you found me.
So who did the most damage to the community, HIV or her? I say that from the bottom of my heart. That's not anger. I look at it that way. I really, really look at it that way now.
So with that dedication, update, and kind of obvious trigger warning that we will be talking about both the AIDS crisis and a woman's exploitation of that, I'm going to cut to my original introduction. And by original, I mean maybe the fourth one that I have written and filmed for this video. And we're going to talk about the myth of Ruth Coker Burks. I've always loved learning about ACT UP and other protest organizations, but this video is not really about protest organization. It is about kinds of organization that help during massive scale loss of life, such as the AIDS crisis, about organizations that help with the day-to-day survival of gay and queer people and people who are affected by HIV. But in this video, we're being a little bit less protest-focused and a bit more... Okay, like I said, I've been working on this video since like September, and I still don't really know how to translate this from my like big, of course I understand what Pride Month is about speech. Because I understand what Pride Month is about. I assume you watching this also understand what Pride Month is about. In this video, we have to talk about a straight woman who got famous by referring to herself as the AIDS angel, sometimes the cemetery angel. We got to talk about her GoFundMe Grift, because what I want to actually talk about is the community work that was happening and does still happen in the town that both Ruth Coker Burks, the cemetery angel, and I grew up in. Work that is important and meaningful, and that they are still struggling to be able to secure the funding to do, and that she completely erases and wallpapers over in her memoir, All the Young Men, which I read, and with the help of some new friends that I made to help me fact check it, will be tearing to shreds in a later section of this video. This is the story of Ruth Coker Burks, and of all the young men hidden in the shadow of the cemetery angel. I personally first became aware of Ruth due to some incredibly flattering coverage of her that originated in the Arkansas Times, and by incredibly flattering, I mean...
It's hard to convince people these days that one lonely person can budge the vast stone wheel of apathy. The truth, though, is the same as it ever was. One pair of willing hands might inspire thousands or millions to push. That's the way the world has changed, hand by hand. One person who found the courage to push the wheel is Ruth Coker Burks.
Like lots of stuff like that the whole way through. That article then got picked up and run in syndication in other publications, including gay-specific ones, which is how a lot of other people found it, and how it then kind of got internet virality rather than just being a story in an Arkansas newspaper. Again, I don't remember exactly when I had first seen this article about Ruth, but I do remember that it was long after I had left Arkansas, and just seeing the state mentioned in the same headline as something that clearly had to do with like gay history and the AIDS crisis was sort of exciting and unexpected to me. Like, even before I clicked in and saw that it was specifically the town that I had lived in, I was like, wow, I kind of didn't know there was gay history in Arkansas. And that's like an embarrassing thing to admit to now that I've done the level of research that I have. But I just didn't know. I was very homeschooled and sheltered. So to me, it was like surprising that there was any kind of, you know, story about a gay person who had been in Arkansas at all, even told through this lens of, you know, the heroine is this straight white woman. And the thing about the story that Ruth tells is that it is in equal parts really devastating and very, very easily believable. So Ruth's story, her claim to being the AIDS or cemetery angel, depending on which publication she's in, it all hinges on a story that, you know, I'm not saying is not true, but that I am saying later gets greatly exaggerated and repeated and turned into one in a big figure that is ever increasingly inflated based on how good it makes Ruth look. This initial story is a really heartbreaking one of a young man named Jimmy who was emaciated, very sick, wanted his mother so badly that when this random woman walked in because she heard somebody crying for help from the hallway, he mistook her for his mother. Ruth says that she then held his hand and said, I'm here, I'm here. She stroked his hair and sat with him until he passed away and let him, in his sick confusion, have that moment of relief of thinking that it had been his mother there with him, even though the mother would not come when she was called because she had disowned her gay son. Ruth's story is that that disownment continued even after Jimmy had passed away. His mother would not claim his body, so she and her daughter buried him themselves. And then, as I said, as the story continues to be applied to more and more people, that would be something that she would do with other men who knew that the end was coming to them, especially as pertains to their AIDS diagnosis. She would help them prepare for the end, and then she would bury them, and she had land on a cemetery that we also have to circle back around to later in this video, that she would bury them in. From Ruth's account of the story, whenever she would bury an AIDS victim in this cemetery, she would get a chipped cookie jar at a discount from a pottery shop that she drops by name and bury them in the cookie jar on the land in this historic cemetery in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And like I said, this story is very believable, right? So many gay people end up being estranged from or disowned by their family, even without, the kind of fear that was surrounding early days of HIV and AIDS, especially when people were less educated on how it can be contracted and spread. Of course, and unfortunately, so many people, so many gay people, so many AIDS victims died alone, unattended by their family, sometimes unable to have their partners in the same room as them. This is a reason why marriage equality is actually a concern. Because people were not able to be with their loved ones at the end because they weren't married and it was immediate family only. So none of these parts are details on which Ruth's story later gets caught out because, as I said, it is incredibly believable. Of course. Nothing about these initial stories that she's telling really quite flag anything, which I think is part of why they got so widely spread. However, like I said, she gets caught out in the numbers, in the way that she exaggerates. Her numbers and figures that she quotes seemed to very quickly balloon outside of what would have been supported by CDC data and death tolls and population estimates in the area. I feel like I need to say this before I get super deep into debunking a lot of the things that we will be going over in this video. If Ruth had told this story to the tune of one person or 3 people or 5-ish people, not only do I not think that anybody would have questioned her on it, I also think that it still would have been a really beautiful and meaningful and important thing for her to do. It still would have been very impactful. It still would have been something that she could have been praised for in newspapers if we really felt like it. But this other thing that she does that we're going to be going over, this exaggeration, this ballooning, this constant self-centering at the expense of the actual victims in the story, it is so much further beyond anything that I can support. I only started looking back into this Ruth Coker Burks story because I was like, wow, maybe I can tell this story about this woman who sat with these dying men, because when we talk about allies during the AIDS crisis, and we're not talking about, the lesbians who were actually doing things to help, and the people who were in the community who were actually helping each other even while they were sick or at risk of being sick, we talk about, and I love her, we talk about Princess Diana, we talk about Tammy Faye, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but I already was so interested by that focus pulling we already do. And I thought, okay, well, at least there's one woman who seems to have gotten famous for that and not have already been famous and been using that for leverage. Maybe that's also interesting. And I was right when I messaged my friend and I said, I think this might be interesting. But I did not have any idea the way that it would end up being interesting. The inconsistency in her numbers, along with some other ones that we will be covering more throughout this video, were brought up in articles titled Ruth Coker Burks and the Missing Monument and Doubts Surround Viral Story of AIDS Angel. Both of those are excellent and linked in the description. We will talk about them more as we go through the video, but highly recommend. Again, I'm not breaking anything. I Googled and I found these articles, and then I made this video largely based on what I did and who I spoke to after I found these articles. This video would not exist without those articles. I think they're both extremely well written. They also both happen to feature our first ever official Okie Dokie friend of the channel, Tim Looper.
There was no proof in the pudding. So she just put out one of those little single containers of pudding. You know what I'm saying? A little snack pack. She didn't make a whole damn bowl for everybody. It was just one. And she selfishly ate out of it.
I love Tim. I am so grateful and excited to have been able to meet him and connect with him for this video. I'm also very excited to introduce him to all of you here in the Nuance Corner.
So what's going on this morning? How can I help you? I mean, I know I can help you. I didn't know how you wanted to start this or what you wanted to do, but going on the record, I'm Tim Looper.
Tim is a minister in Hot Springs, and he was friends with Ruth for decades prior to the articles coming out in 2021.
There's so much out there that, like you said, a lot of people did not know that what was really going on in the background, but I personally was involved with her 30 years, and that's what I was so blindsided.
And again, I just genuinely cannot express how helpful and kind and also just reassuring and easy to talk to this man is.
You're not wasting your time, okay? Don't doubt that. You did the right thing. The truth is there's no bitterness or animosity anymore. My thing was I beat myself up for 3 years, got deep depression because I allowed myself to trust her that much that I didn't see it coming. I really didn't see it coming.
That Arkansas Times article that I mentioned earlier is by David Kuhn, and in it, in addition to that story of Jimmy that I told earlier, the article states that Ruth buried over 36 men with her own hands. On her website, although I will allow the language here is vaguer, it says helped care for and not specifically buried. That number is more than 1,000 people. In that initial Cemetery Angel article, Ruth says she has a list of names upstairs. Plans for a monument formed because of Ruth in this puff piece about her and her identity as the Cemetery Angel said she has a list of names and someday she would like to see a memorial be built. I tried as much as I could to entrench myself in the version of the lore that she provides. I listened to her appear on podcasts. I watched news clips where she had been interviewed about the cemetery. I watched a short film that was made about her by Rose McGowan that we absolutely need to discuss. And I took a lot of notes. I had a lot of questions, a lot of things that I felt like only Tim or other people who had been there could really kind of actually put to rest in terms of some of my thoughts and issues with things that were being put forward in the Ruth account of events. When I say I took notes for my conversation with Tim Looper, it's actually just I have a lot of notes. I had a lot of questions. Because I think, and this is a reason why I'm being very intentional with the way that I am presenting Ruth's story, with the fact that I'm not allowing her to give you a version of it that will make you feel emotional, because I know from experience how much this story tugs on the heartstrings. Because all of this boils into one great big misconception, which is that AIDS work in Arkansas is over with. That it had only ever hinged around Ruth Coker Burks' work of sitting with the dying and burying them after they had passed. That is sad and over with now, and isn't that nice? We can talk about how great it was that lady had an activist moment before she moved to Florida and seems to have stopped her AIDS advocacy work for many, many years before popping back up to self-proclaim as the Cemetery Angel.
She basically disappeared out of the scene. She was not even in the community here for 20 years. I mean, it was like all the stories of the 80s that you're reading about. There's a time gap between that and 2020. So what did you really do for the community? You know, did you teach them? Are you teaching them PrEP now? Or are you teaching them about condoms then? And that's the thing. Like I said, I didn't know the things in the background that she was doing, but I knew the things that she was telling everybody that she was doing on the front burner part wasn't true because she wasn't here during that time. And in fact, she never moved back to Hot Springs. She went straight to Northwest Arkansas when she came back to town. There's been 3 buildings to house pantries, the medicine, the labs, and the clinic for 34 years with them. And I can never think of one time that she was ever at any one of those events of testing, volunteering to distribute the food. They would do like fundraisers to help the clinic. We did HIV testing free. We do like free testing days, which in HIV and all STDs. We had functions where we actually would have speakers and pharmaceutical companies coming in and introducing AZT and trying to get people to be the guinea pigs and that type of thing. And that was always run by the people who had the certification to do so. And Mike is that individual. I mean, Mike's been there for 34 years.
In November of 2023, we had a phone interview with Mike Melancon, the founder and director of the Tuggle Shelby Clinic in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which provides life-saving and extending care to people living with HIV, and has since the years outlined in Ruth's memoir and stories. Any and all ad revenue from this video will be donated to the clinic, and receipts for the donations will be provided on my community page. Please see the description for more information if you would also like to donate. We're going to talk about this more a little later in the video as well.
I got it started back in 1991 when I really started looking into it with the help of a couple people here, because there was a small grassroots effort of trying to do a clothing pantry, and I knew one of the ladies. She actually asked me to come in and kind of assist them. That really wasn't my thing, doing clothes or whatever, because I'm a social worker by trade. But I went to a few of the meetings and was staying abreast of what was going on, because they were trying to help. It was in the basement of a home here in Hot Springs in the historic district, and the lady whose home it was in, her son was HIV positive, and there wasn't a lot of services here in Hot Springs at that time for somebody infected with HIV. And, I got to know him and got to know a few other people, and then started getting involved with the small little organization. There was only like 4 people involved.
Ruth talks about this like she was the only person there, and she was not.
I got involved with Sister Dorothy Calhoun, who was a sister of Mercy Nun here that she was with the hospital here. But she had asked me to seriously look at, taking this little group forward. And I said, okay, but it has to be a lot more than, giving out clothing, that type of thing, because it really wasn't much. It was almost like yard sale clothes that people would give them and, just try to give away. And I said, well, you can look into doing a food pantry and, start giving out boxes of food to some of these folks.
That's how I met everyone. I volunteered in the pantry. I worked in the pantry and helped distribute the food, bags of food. And back then there was only probably 20 or 25 patients, probably, if that many, 10, 15. They had a full-fledged pantry, a whole pantry. And the doctor had backup medicines in his office if they ran out. She never offered any of those services. None of those. And I think that, to be honest, I'm not thinking. The thing is that's when she wanted the spotlight taken. She was looking for the spotlight. They were looking for helping people. When that flip-flopped, she left town. She left town on a bad, sour note.
When I started really looking into it, what was needed was medical care. Everybody here pretty much had to go to Little Rock, Arkansas, which is about an hour from us, a little less than an hour. but the problem there was transportation. A lot of the folks that were infected did not have the means, and there's no public transportation running from Hot Springs to Little Rock. So a lot of them, outside of going to an emergency room, emergency department, which that's not your primary care setting, that's not your setting to go get infectious disease or HIV meds, anything like that. So I looked into doing it, and it took me a few years to get it up off the ground. And it was actually back in, I think it was 1995, late 94, 95, when I actually got the clinic up and running, because it took quite a while to do this, because we didn't do it with any federal funds, any state funds. It was strictly donations, and it took quite a while to do this. But my biggest hurdle was partnering with a hospital here in town, which is our biggest hospital, which is now, it's called Mercy, St. Vincent. It's a Catholic hospital, but back then it was St. Joseph's Regional Health Center. And I met with them and met with the Board of Trustees, told them what my plan was, and they were on board with paying the lease on a building that we could hold these clinics in. And it's been in place ever since that time. We've had a wonderful relationship with them, because actually it was real simple to tell it to them. I said, pretty much, if you don't give me this kind of money per month to pay for this little spaces that we need in a leased building, I'm going to send everybody to the emergency room to access some services. And they knew right there that, hey, it's easier just to pay a few $100s at that time for the rent on a two-room building to save them money and to help us and to promote what we were doing. And it is now involved and revolved to where we're at now. Now we're in a lot more professional setting, and they've continued the relationship. They still pay the lease on our building. And so I'm very fortunate there, and hope to continue that relationship with them for as long as they're willing to do it, as long as we're able to do that.
I don't ever remember her ever trying to even get anybody on medications. She only went to places where people were already dying.
The specific work that Ruth Coker Burks was doing, the work of sitting with somebody while they passed away, that was good and important and meaningful work. And it is thanks to medical advancements and thanks to the protesters who made those medical advancements happen in the first place that work is less necessary now. But other work surrounding HIV and AIDS patients always still will exist.
And that's why I said, I'm not saying she didn't do any good, because if anybody helps somebody, whether they're infected with HIV or other chronic illness, they're doing a good service, for that person. They're helping. And, that's what's needed. And with our organization, with our cause, with HIV, early on we did have people dying, but not at the numbers that she portrayed in the book. But now we have hardly nobody dying. With the medications that we've had the past probably 15 years, especially when protease inhibitors hit the market, and we were able to start getting everybody on those medications. People living normal life expectancy. I don't know how much detail you want on that book that was written. It caused a little stink here in our community here, because there was so much in the book that was not factual. And I don't know the author of the book. I don't think he really did a lot of fact checking.
Mm-hmm.
It's because pretty much some of the principal players that the book was written about are still here in Hot Springs, and I know them very well. And they would tell you, hey, it didn't happen. It didn't happen like that. It was just false. And how do you combat that when she got somebody to write a book?
The only part that is probably, in my perspective, the bulk of it that's true, absolute truth, she did visit people in the hospital. She did bury a handful of people there whose parents had turned or could not afford that. As for the personal responsibility of being involved all the way from AZT in the 80s through the medicines through the decades, that stopped in like the 90s for her. To be honest, when I read the book, that's when our friendship split and went straight down the drain hole. Because after I read the book, I read it in one day, and I was so emotionally all over the place that I took it back to the person that loaned it to me and threw it on the desk and said what I thought. I walked in and threw it on his desk, and I said, "This is total BS." And he says, "That's why I wanted you to read it, because," and I'll tell you, it was Mike at the clinic. So he had bought the book, he read it, and then said, "I'm not going to say anything, but I want you to read it." We had a lot to say after that, because the dates, a lot of the time frame and everything, he was actually running Hot Springs Age Resources, and he still has it. He's one of the original founders. But read the book and see if you find my name or his in it, or Daymon's. The ones who remember why she left Hot Springs Age Resources in the 80s anyway.
I may have already sort of given up the twist here of my personal enjoyment of Ruth Coker Burks and Kevin Carr O'Leary's memoir, All the Young Men, when I said earlier that I would be ripping it to shreds later in this video. But if that wasn't already kind of a clear enough review, this is one of the worst memoirs, if not one of the worst books I have ever read in my life. It's bad. I don't even just dislike Ruth, which I do. I mean, you will walk away from this video understanding exactly how much I dislike Ruth Coker Burks. But this book is bad. This is a book that is entirely unaware of which of its parts its readers are most interested in, which is to say, you know, you would think most people picking up a book called All the Young Men, a story of chosen family and AIDS in the American South, are looking to read primarily about the young men and that chosen family, and not about how hard Ruth Coker Burks' life is, because the second thing is what the book is actually about. And part of it where her life seems to be less hard than it usually is, in the parts where she's asking for your sympathy about it, is the part where she was plugged into the gay community in Hot Springs at the time of the beginning of the AIDS crisis. It really, like, a lot of the book is about her being a financially struggling young mother, to a point where it really does feel like just pages and pages and pages of handout money, please. And that's all at the expense of actually taking any time to humanize or flesh out, you know, all the young men who the book was named for, all of these people who Ruth has kind of propped up her legacy and her fame based on. Those men who are turned into, at best, one-dimensional character props for Ruth, and at worst, completely offensive caricatures of themselves or men like them that I now can't even really fully fact-check the existence of, for reasons we'll be getting into. So yeah, I hate this book. I hate this book all the way down to its title, and I gave Tim my estimation of all of that when I was about halfway through reading it during our second conversation. I told him that I thought even the title itself was beginning to strike me as a bit dehumanizing, that these men, these fully fledged individual people, were being distilled down into a set of props for Ruth Coker Burks to carry around in her bag and trot out as it serves her. Not real men, not fully formed people or individuals with lives and people who loved them and missed them, but Ruth's men. She says, my guys, constantly. And it is in a way that, you know, to me, to me, feels a lot more possessive than it does endeared. And not to brag, but when I told Tim that this was my reading of this memoir, he told me essentially that I'm right.
You nailed it. It's her little click in her purse and her means to fame and fortune in her head from day one. From day one. After you read this part about Tim and Jimmy, there's going to be a couple others she mentioned, and you'll see the same behavior. It was just she tailgated the entire community to achieve her goal. That was the only thing. That was the only motive. We were close for 35 years. Nah, I'm gonna say 30 years because it started splintering about 7 years ago. I didn't see it coming, and I did not know that it was going to turn out that way until I read the book. And the rest of the book will portray exactly everything that you've nailed.
That obviously felt really good and reassuring to hear. And we then talked about what feels to me like some pretty clear indiscretion on the part of either Ruth or her co-writer, but really, you know, it comes down to either or both of them when it's published with both their names on it, right? In terms of information that really did not need to be publicized in the manner that it was in the book.
They had to go through this, and it all came out. I mean, that's personal information that not everyone in the United States should know or have access to. And there it was. She mentioned a pediatrician in the book that I knew personally was a friend of mine and revealed personal information about how his death happened. I don't know if you've read that. I don't even know where it's in the book, but you'll find it. It's yes, you nailed it. I probably couldn't tell you anything else right now that you haven't already kind of picked up with your discernment.
I really would like to think that even having not already read that follow-up Arkansas Times article about Ruth, that this book may have pinged on my bullshit meter. I would really like to think that, but I'm not entirely sure that it would, and I don't want to take credit as if it did. I was doing a close reading on this because I knew that it was written by somebody who seems, by all accounts, to be a bit of a huckster. With that being the way I was reading the book, though, you know, like, that's why I hadn't finished it by the time I got back to my conversation with Tim. It was because it was making me too angry, and I needed time to get through it because I was just getting a little bit too heated. And it's not just me that this book bothers. You can go sort from low to high on Goodreads for a real good time if you want to see some other people who have also taken the time to point out why this book is bad and what is bad and feels so wrong about it. There's also lots of reviews that take it completely at face value and, like, thank her for her service, but yeah, the people who took the time to pan this book did a really good job of panning it. A big fixture in Ruth's hospital stories is always the nurses and healthcare professionals being extremely mean, cruel, and cold to the HIV/AIDS patients. This is another thing that, like, kind of made sense to me. I mean, I'm always going to be inclined to believe that homophobia is a thing that impacts the way people are treated, especially as it comes to when a disease was so new and so feared and so misunderstood. But I did still think it was worth asking Tim about that.
Her bedside manners were more of a... She was a bully to the nurses and the doctors. She bullied them.
I don't put a lot of stock into that either. I know we were here early on. I know she said she was doing this even before we were here, you know, on the ground running back in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. But I never saw it, never heard about it, where she said that, you know, they wasn't taking care of a person. She got them relocated. Out of all that, I never seen that at all. Our healthcare here is really good. It is really good. Back then, yes, it was new. You know, they a lot of times didn't know what to do, but they used were they worried? Yes. But they said, hey, they knew they were not going to contract the disease unless they did a few things that put them in that arena to contract it. And so they did their job. Nurses are very caring people, or they wouldn't be in that field. They're very compassionate. And that made me really angry. It put a bad light on not only healthcare here in our town, but healthcare as a whole, about how it's being treated in the South. But the forte with the healthcare, it was portrayed, I would say, wrongly.
That whole story right there, wrong hospital, lady. You said you was in Little Rock. That happened here in St. Joseph in Hot Springs. No, it wasn't like that. She was rude to the nurses and the doctors, yes. But they were only doing their job. And you're talking the 80s when people did not know. There was tents around people. You went in with scrubs and gloves and masks and everything. You didn't just walk in there and throw your weight around like you were some la-da-da person. Because when you do, the truth comes out and people prove you wrong.
I don't even know if surprised is the right word to explain how I felt at Tim telling me about those discrepancies in hospital location between reality and Ruth's ever-changing stories in her book and the articles. I wasn't surprised because enough things had already changed from those articles to the book that I was like, oh, so we're going a bit loosey-goosey with things then. But, still, just to have something confirmed so plainly always, I think, was going to surprise me. So I asked him more. I said that I would really like to know anything that he could tell me about the actual men that Ruth was dehumanizing and referring to as her guys, the ones she was treating as so interchangeable with each other. And I specifically asked about Jimmy, the Jimmy from the story, the Jimmy who wanted his mother, whose story had changed between the articles and the book to now include Jimmy as the one who gave Ruth the angel title, something that truly bothered me. I actually told Tim exactly how much that bothered me, that I felt as though she was using a man who can't speak for himself as a mouthpiece to further a narrative she's already built by a man who can't speak for himself and his story and the story of his passing. So I was really, really, really hoping that he could tell me something or connect me to somebody who could tell me something about Jimmy. The Jimmy from the hospital, the Jimmy that is apparently the reason Ruth calls herself the cemetery angel, distinct and different in the story that she tells, the Jim who is later introduced in the books. Because there is a Jim, and there is also Jimmy. And based on the structure of the book, the fact that Jimmy's death is what spawns Ruth to even begin working in this kind of death doula capacity, the Jim who passes away later would have been a different person because it's an entirely different story once she is much more settled into helping people pass away. And, a lot of people are named James or variations from that. But here's what Tim said.
I never met this Jimmy. The only Jimmy that I knew that she knew is Jim and Timmy. Characters moved around like pieces of a puzzle in this book. And you're right. That part right there is repetitive over and over and over and over. Let's make it a big long story so we'll forget that I said Jimmy, because Jimmy was Jim and Timmy. Can I disprove that with evidence? No, because Jimmy's dead. And so is Timmy, and he's buried right next to him, and those were two of the people. But Jimmy and Little Rock, Mama, blah, 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 that story, that's Jimmy. And it was in Hot Springs. It was not in Little Rock. But there's specifically when you get into this rest of this book on this part here with Timmy and Jim, you're going to see the connection, like you said, from day one. But Jimmy, little Jimmy, is Jim. He was little Jimmy, and then he became Jim when they got close. Same guy.
And I mean, this is an allegation, right? To be clear, exactly like what Tim said in that clip, we can't actually confirm this one way or the other. But it's not an allegation that anything in Ruth's book does to disprove or to dissuade me from believing. It's an allegation I personally, with the available information and with the narrative that is given in Ruth's book, don't have a hard time believing. And why do I think that? Well, so she provides Jim's last name because Jim, as we will get to, we have to talk about this later, as we will get to, Jim does have a headstone in Files Cemetery. She provides Jim and his partner Tim's last name in her book. She does not provide a last name for Jimmy. She does not provide a last name for the vast majority of the men who are mentioned in her book. And it really, really bothers me for reasons, again, that we will be getting into, that Jim and Tim, you know, out of this entire crop of men that she talks about in ways that are less than respectful, the two that she treats the absolute most disrespectfully are, of course, the two who are actually named and who I actually can confirm are real people. Doesn't that make it worse? Is it not worse that she didn't just refuse to give the last name of Jim and Tim if she wasn't going to give the last name of anyone? But again, I'm not even exaggerating when I tell you that the way that she speaks about Jim and Tim, and I will give you examples a bit later in the video, that on top of their existing grave marker in Files Cemetery made me so angry that I had to do something. More about that later.
I think that's why it caused such a big gap, because so many people actually believed everything and went out and bought the book, you know, which I'm glad I read it. I would have never bought it because of the way our argument ended and the way she had the lawyer contact me and was going to try to sue me. And it was just like, you know, come on, let's do this. And I never heard from her again. Hadn't talked to her since. And I know I won't, but the thing about it is, I can still tell the story.
There have been some people read the book and they knew about Ruth, and so it was like, oh, we're not about to do anything with any organization that's doing anything with HIV. You know, it's tough enough being in the arena of HIV and AIDS here in Hot Springs, but when you had some negativity come out on it, it was like, wow, that was huge. But it almost gave us a black eye, but it definitely bruises a good bit. And the sad part about it, the majority of the people are good people. We had nothing to do with what she was doing. Mm-hmm. That was the problem. But they lumped it all in one basket, you know, and it was like, wow, we're gonna catch the flack of this. And that has happened. You know, I've had some people talk to me at different times, especially right after the book came out. And I was really worried. Everybody was talking about there was going to be a movie, and I was really scared about that. And as far as I know now, that they put the brakes on that.
I will say, and just like I told the investigator, and I told the lawyer, and I told the Today Show, 90% of that book is BS. Now, if I was going to write a little fairy tale and make like a nonfiction and make it into a movie, which she had planned to do with the proceeds of the book, she already had characters lined up of who was going to play her in the movie. That's how far stretched this was going out. So it was planned from day one. The book was for profits to make a movie.
This movie that Tim is referring to actually would have been a different thing than the Vodka-sponsored short film I mentioned earlier that was made by Rose McGowan. This would have been a full-length movie, and it seems to, thankfully, have stalled out in pre-production following the articles about Ruth coming out in 2021. But I do want to talk a little bit about that short film that did come out, just, while we're on the topic. So even though I am far from done with complaining about this book, let's take a short little intermission from the book review section of our time together today to talk about a short film that I really hate. So this short film, it's called Ruth, which, already gives you a pretty clear indication of who the main character and focus is, which in and of itself, other than this pattern of the way that the actual people who were hurt and victimized in this situation are continually being minimized and ignored, of course it was always going to be about Ruth. But with all of that context and with some things that we haven't even yet gotten to, I really find this short film to be extremely heinous. This short film, like the book that it predates, is all about Ruth. It is entirely about her. It is about what an angel she is, how she is the only person who was doing anything to help anybody. And just like how Tim Looper pointed out Jim and Tim feeling really interchangeable within the context of the All the Young Men book, this short film also uses the young men who Ruth Coker Burks has helped as completely interchangeable figures. It renames Jimmy. It uses the story of Jimmy's death, this story that we have been told over and over again as we've been kind of working our way through the Ruth Coker Burks universe. It retells that story, and it keeps very, very many of the original details of Jimmy's death, but it changes his name. And it doesn't just change it. I mean, I'm not sitting here complaining about some very minor inaccuracy. I mean, it swaps his name. It takes the name of Jimmy away and uses the name of another young man who is featured very prominently in Ruth's book. And then it uses features of Jimmy's story while calling him Billy, because Billy is another character, but actually a real person, a real human being who was loved and who had a life and people who loved him. And he instead now is the new name for Jimmy, who passed away alone in the hospital with nobody but Ruth to help him, which was not the story, even as told in Ruth's book, of what happened to Billy. And I just don't understand how that's okay. I don't understand how anybody could be okay with that happening in a short film adaptation of their life and of the people that they helped. I don't understand how somebody who lost, not just 2, but dozens to hundreds to over 1,000, depending on which iteration of Ruth's numbers we believe. Somebody who lost that many people to the same illness and watched them all so interchangeably be sick and discarded. How that person would then be okay with their names getting swapped around like a Scrabble bag. I mean, just pick a third name. Pick a third name that lets the character in the movie represent both Jimmy and Billy. Pick a third name. Call him Tommy. That's just off the top of my head, right? That's less offensive. Billy was a real person. This was not the story of Billy's death. And yet now, because the movie was about Ruth, it is. The story of Billy's death is as it was portrayed in this movie, even though that's not actually what the story of his life was. The real Billy is associated with Ruth. He's in pictures in her book, and he has passed away far too long ago for anybody to actually have a more clear understanding of him other than the people who already knew him. All that we get is this diluted, Ruth-filtered lens on all of these people. That's not fair. It's not right.
I'm Ruth Coker Burks, and I am the keeper of memories.
This movie prides itself on giving Ruth yet another title, as if calling her the cemetery angel or the AIDS angel weren't already gratuitous enough. It calls her the keeper of the memories, and they are memories that aren't being kept with any level of real respect, in my opinion. I just think if somebody were to make a short film that was purportedly about how amazing I was, in part because of my relationship with a friend of mine who passed, and they treated that friend who passed in this way, so interchangeably, like he doesn't matter, like he's not different from my other friend who also passed, I would be devastated. I would be heartbroken. It makes my heart ache to think about this, and I did not know Billy or Jimmy. I would throw a fit. I would throw a huge fit and make them fix it in post, and I would say, his name was not Billy, his name was Jimmy, you know his name was Jimmy. But, you know, as far as I can tell, that didn't happen. Barring an enormous fit, getting some voiceover work fixed, I would also maybe tweet something and say, I hate this short film. And, you know, nothing of the sort seems to have happened on Ruth's account either. I have no reason to believe that she does not enjoy this short film that was made about her. Why wouldn't she? It's about her. The young men were nothing other than a prop in her purse, interchangeable characters. Of course it was fine that they changed Jimmy's name to Billy. They're all her guys, anyway. There is also probably a video essay in and of itself on how alcohol brands specifically engage in the corporatization of pride, and how strange I think that is, that they would be funding this kind of short film in the first place. But that's a little bit too much of a digression, because we unfortunately have plenty more to talk about when it comes to Ruth Coker Burks.
I have been looking for this opportunity for a long time, just to get it out. I have no remorse. I want my community to heal and not be attached to that. I mean, that's pretty much where it ended. Now, it did kind of split the community between the old and the young that really didn't know what was going on. But instead of blocking on Facebook, y'all reached out to me and wanted to know the story, the truth. The other ones don't want to hear the truth. I think what triggered her was the response of the community. Oh my God, a book! We're going to be on the map. She made all these promises, and none of them were kept.
These broken promises that he's referring to here are largely to do with, you know, the film that never happened, or the GoFundMe grift that I glossed over earlier. You know, when I was saying that Ruth said she had a list of names upstairs and that that's why plans for the memorial happened in the first place. The memorial was supposed to happen through the GoFundMe. We gotta talk about this GoFundMe. You know, like I said earlier, I was really touched when I saw Ruth's story online. And that was the case for many, many young gay people who came across this story, whether or not they were from Hot Springs, Arkansas originally. Somebody else who was as touched by that article as I was once he saw it picked up in later gay syndication is a man named Travis Dubrail. Unlike many of the people who have helped to sort of nurture and support Ruth's angelic reputation, Travis was a stranger to Ruth. He saw her story, he saw her mention that she wants a memorial placed and that she has names, and thinking to himself that that would be a simple problem to solve, he decided that he would start a GoFundMe for a memorial in Files Cemetery. I say it that way because it will be important for you to keep in your mind that the original stated goal and intention for this GoFundMe was to create a memorial for the men lost to the AIDS crisis who have been buried in Files Cemetery. But as he shared with NBC when they would later interview him, he got an email from a friend of Ruth's not very long after he had launched the GoFundMe fundraiser. They wanted a modest amount of the money raised to go to Ruth and her health concerns and expenses. And I want you to pay attention to what this email seems to imply that the ultimate goal with that money would still be, even if that modest sum were to be routed to Ruth for her health expenses. Travis didn't have a problem with some of the money going to Ruth's expenses as it was laid out to him, because what was laid out to him was very different from what ended up actually happening. Because what happened was Travis updated the GoFundMe, and the story continued to go steadily more and more viral through 2017. As a result of this virality and, the generosity of gay people, let's be real, the GoFundMe fundraiser raised over $70,000 for, again, the expressly stated purpose was for the memorial and also for a portion, a modest sum, to go towards Ruth and her expenses. Ruth and her expenses were always a second and lesser goal of this GoFundMe. That's second both chronologically in terms of when it was added to being what the GoFundMe was trying to accomplish, and in terms of what's listed in the description, where people were choosing to donate. They were seeing primarily for this memorial and also some of it to Ruth. People were donating to Ruth's cause, sure. People were aware some of the money was stated to be routed towards her health expenses, yes. But the lawyer is going to try to bullshit us about this later, so I need to make sure that we have it extremely straight. This was a GoFundMe for a memorial for all of these men who died, who were not buried at the time by their family, and who Ruth claims to have buried in unmarked cookie jars in the ground. This was supposed to be for them. It became only really about Ruth. It wasn't supposed to be about her. It became about her. I feel in discourse we have let so much be about her. I wanted to try to find a way to make this video where I didn't even mention her in the thumbnail. I wished that there was a way that I could have made this video and feel like I was sure that people would watch it, where I didn't actually mention her and get into her grift, because I'm sure even this level of attention she probably also loves. But this was about Ruth. This was not about the men that she helped. None of anything she has ever done in her press tours, in her repeatedly calling herself an angel, none of it has been about the people she helped. A lot of things would be a lot different if it was. I'm not saying anything to do with what she was actually doing in the 80s and 90s, which again seems to have stopped after the 80s and 90s, something she doesn't even argue. She says again and again in her interviews on her website she was made functionally obsolete by medical advancements. So nothing she has done since coming back around after deciding that she is still in this opt-in obsolescence that she loves so much is actually to do with anybody but herself, her own vanity, her own ego. And that ego got fed incredibly well. Travis says that he and Ruth had minimal contact during this time, texting occasionally, like when he would ask her for updates to post to the GoFundMe page for all of the donors, and she just apparently straight up lied. She just straight up lied. She said they are working on the foundation now, which, if I'm being extremely generous, maybe she meant they are making a Ruth Coker Burks as an amazing AIDS angel foundation, and then we're gonna work on that after I have a foundation about how much I love myself and everything I ever did. Or she meant, well, Travis isn't gonna come check, he's in New York. I'll just say they're building a foundation when they're not. As in, a foundation for a $65,000 statue that has never come to fruition in Files Cemetery. Travis never got the pictures of that foundation that he asked for, because of course he didn't, because it doesn't exist, because Ruth was lying. GoFundMe does take out portions of fees and platform stuff. Another good reason to look into directly donating your money right to the people that you want to give it to. But after those fees were taken out, Travis and Ruth worked together so that Travis could release $65,000 to Ruth for this memorial, purportedly. And once that money was paid over to Ruth, Travis apparently found himself unable to even get a text message back from her. So after not hearing from her for months, Travis eventually paused the fundraiser in late November. And less than a month after that, during an interview, Ruth would, peculiarly enough, claimed to be currently raising money to make a nice memorial at Files Cemetery. As in, she was saying that after the fundraiser that Travis had been doing was closed, and I'm not aware of any other fundraiser she may have opened. Maybe she was just looking for direct donations that she may or may not decide to use to beautify the cemetery. Again, this is in December after the fundraiser had been paused and she had ghosted Travis before November. She went into what are, as of now, 2024, still incomplete plans for what she wanted to do to beautify the cemetery, talking about a weeping angel statue, gardens. It's weird, right? It's weird to make a donation pitch once the GoFundMe is already paused. I wonder what she had cooking at that point, because she didn't seem to actually have real plans to beautify the cemetery. I have talked to somebody who has done a lot of work to beautify the cemetery, though. You actually already know him. It's Tim Looper. You may have already noticed this from the way I have kind of mentioned it and then circled back around to it. The Files Cemetery aspect of all of this is actually kind of a challenging part of this story for me to lay out. In her press, podcast appearances, her memoir, anytime Ruth is telling you her version of events, she says that she owns Files Cemetery. Now, Files Cemetery is actually a public cemetery in Hot Springs, Arkansas, meaning it doesn't have an owner. The closest thing it has to an owner actually was interviewed by the Today Show and didn't know who Ruth was or where this claim that she owned the cemetery was coming from. Ruth has referred to the cemetery as her only inheritance. She has told a story about her mother and an uncle getting into a fight and the mother buying up 262 plots of land on Files Cemetery so that that uncle could never be buried with the rest of his family. This is because for that public cemetery, the only real requirement to actually be buried there was essentially that there be space, and also that somebody in your family had previously been buried there. So even though, as All the Young Men tells it, there would be markers up saying that all of the empty graves that had been purchased by Ruth's mother were owned by the Coker family, that isn't the case, as far as anybody who has been at Files Cemetery has ever said. I mean, as far as that article from NBC goes, they said there isn't even 262 plots total in Files Cemetery, let alone 262 empty ones that Ruth has just been sitting on. I find this claim of owning the cemetery really interesting because to me, the parts of me that think that this story is so compelling and heartwarming don't rely on Ruth owning the cemetery, right? It's sweeter if it's a family thing and she's saying, hey, these estranged people are my family, I'm going to bury them. But it wasn't a family thing. And I don't know if that's because it was kind of a grasp for more legitimacy at what she said she had been doing, trying to make it seem like there would have been reason that if somebody caught her digging a grave in the middle of the night, as she says that she did, and as Tim says that he does not believe happened.
And with all due respect, I personally know that there were only 5 in that cemetery. There were no overnights.
That's why she wouldn't be bothered or something, or maybe just a matter of, well, they're believing me about everything else. I don't know. But Ruth's story is that she owns this cemetery, and it doesn't seem to be the case.
The people that she mentions about certain things that she got from businesses donated to put them in and who helped her at the funeral home and all that, they even went and talked to the owner of the funeral home and she debunked it. I mean, come on. She has a license to a funeral home and she's going to go digging in the middle of the night and take a chance. I'm going to, cremate these people with no consent and we're going to sneak out in the cemetery in the middle of the night. Yeah, really? No. Now, if that was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, episode 15, I would believe it.
This is a public cemetery, and one that has historically not been very well maintained as a result. Following the story gaining attention and virality, though, a lot of interest did spark in the area and in volunteering to do cleanup at the cemetery. Doing a lot of work like planting flowers, things that you might have been something that Ruth was attempting to take credit for in what I referred to earlier as a donation pitch in that other magazine. A lot of people came together on multiple different occasions to clean up File Cemetery, to plant flowers, and to beautify the area. This includes, like I said, our friend Tim, the local chapter of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, a man named Robert Clintworth, who you can find quoted in both the Today article and the Arkansas Times article. People came from all over to plant bulbs that were donated from the yards of people in Hot Springs and people from all over, people who had mailed them in. Again, this is because this story of these men who were abandoned by their family, who were left to die, who were so mistreated by our government, by the healthcare system, by a lack of interest in medical advancements that could have saved their lives much sooner. And I want to make sure that this part does not get lost here, right? As we are discussing this missing monument, as we're talking about this GoFundMe grift, as I'm talking about Ruth's constantly inflating numbers, one thing I want to make crystal clear that we do not get lost is that there are AIDS victims buried in File Cemetery. We know this. Some of them were friends of Tim Looper's.
I was there the entire time. 3 of those people out there were my friends. I went to the funeral. I was at that party. I was at those places. I can see those things, and I've been there to those things. And no, it's a total contradiction of absolute truth. Maybe it's truth in her mind, in her little circle that still believes it. But I lived it. I watched it. I saw it play out every day, until she disappeared to Florida and popped back in Hot Springs a few years prior to that.
Some of them were Jim and Tim from the book, who were treated so disrespectfully in the narrative of that book.
Yeah, it was more like a focus on the negative. Oh, they were dressing trashy and like a whore, and his Daisy Dukes and slutty, and have you got to the part where she talks about where they go? she names everywhere, the place, I looked out the window. Just get ready, buckle up, you ain't read nothing yet. They both were wild characters, I'll put it at that. It was the 80s. There was a lot of stuff going on. And when things are going on like that, aren't we supposed to be telling people about prevention and precaution and things to do to prolong our lives? And not what you see as the alternative of let's make them look bad. They were so pathetically sick.
And whose grave marker was left to look like this even after Ruth had gotten not just the GoFundMe money, but also her book advance. So with that in mind, with how many people from the community, meaning, the Hot Springs community and specifically the Hot Springs gay community, but also of the gay community at large from other places. People like Travis from New York, who saw the article about this cemetery in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and wanted to effect change and made the GoFundMe. And everybody who donated to that, and everybody who donated flowers and bulbs and who came to plant them. That was all in an attempt to carry on this, thing that we think of not happening as often ever since the 90s of caring for our lost. A legacy that has never belonged only to Ruth Coker Burks. And I wanted, on a human personal level, as well as for this to be something the video does, to also participate in that legacy of honoring our lost. Like I said earlier about getting so mad that I had to do something, part of getting that mad for me was realizing very early on into working on this video that I absolutely 100% needed to see Jim and Tim's grave marker be replaced. I have talked to many of my friends about this project as I have been working on it, and one of my friends who is more financially stable than I am was able to help me work with Tim to replace this headstone. So again, even as of the time that Ruth's book was published, as of the time that I'm currently recording this, if you look on Find a Grave or in person in File Cemetery for the memorial for Jim and Tim, you would see this. And now, though that original grave marker will stay in place and we have no intention of erasing any kind of history with what we're doing here, there also will be something nicer, something to commemorate the way that these men loved each other in a way that I think that they deserve, and in a way that is much more beautiful and respectful than Ruth's memoir portrayed them. As I mentioned earlier, that short film was incredibly proud of calling Ruth the keeper of the memories. But those memories that were left under her care, not just the memories of Jim and Tim, but of everybody else, especially the ones that she refuses to name, are at real risk of being lost to time because of the way that the keeper of those memories treats those memories. I've already told you what a joy it has been for me to get to know Tim and to be in community with him as we make this video. And it also just really feels worth pointing out, as the friend who helped me to replace that headstone said, in this case, Tim Looper is the keeper of the memories. He's the one who was able to tell us anything about what Jim and Tim were like as people in the first place. He was the one who was able to help us get that marker in place. And he did a Facebook Live the day that he did, and he said, I think, some really beautiful things about his friends.
Saturday afternoon, and I had been mentioning working on another project for something, and since a lot of things are going on this month, the month of June, I would like to walk down here to a particular special spot that means the world to me because of the history and the friendship that these two guys shared with me decades ago.
You can find the link to that live on Tim's Facebook in the description below if you would like to see it in full for yourself. But I thought it was really beautiful, so I am leaving clips for it here.
We were all caught off guard through the years, through the late 80s, the 90s. We saw so many people that had come across different paths in life, different times in life, yet destiny pulled them all together. Destiny pulled a lot of people together at the time out of love, sometimes out of fear because we had no one to turn to with the crisis that was at hand. Years ago, I met these two guys, Tim and Jimmy. I had first met Tim when he lived in Bonnerdale, Arkansas, and we instantly become good friends because we were from about the same area and had a lot in common when it come to gardening, outdoors, walking, that type of thing. But as fate brought it together, the two of them came together, and what a love story. It was definitely a decade of trouble. It was a lot of good times. Everybody was living in the fast lane, and we were all doing this kind of thing. But through the years, a lot of distance, a lot of illness struck the community, and we began to see loved ones and friends that began to take on a progressive disease that started to take out many in the community. Now, with that being said, one of the things that through the years of talking to people about the stories, about the particular place where they are, the things that transpired during the deal, and actually they want to go through all the times that they wanted to celebrate and be together. It come to the point that as their relationship through the years became stronger, they realized that the two of them were just alike. Tim and Jimmy were two individuals that, yeah, but they were great friends, and it was sad to see things that come through the years when we lost them. Years ago, when a lot of the folks had to be placed in cemeteries because they did not have lots, they didn't have family lots, they didn't have family cemeteries, as we call it. So when push come to shove, a lot of folks just had to basically take up their residency after they've transitioned over into the afterlife, and a lot of those people did not have that place to go and rest at peace. A lot of those places, a lot of those people were simply a simple stop that you get from the funeral home saying when and they were born, when their precious body expired, that type of thing. But yes, at one time it was just like you were remembered only by the stop that's in there, that was placed in there the day that you were placed there and left unattended. And when two individuals decide that they're in love, there's no fighting. I don't care who you are, where you come from, what your background is. If you're in love, you're going to go down together. It's just that way. And that's the way in the natural world too. We've seen couples that grow old together and one goes and then the other one transpires as well to receive their peace. It happens all the time. But the story with Tim and Jimmy was a whole different thing. The whole difference is they set out here from the 90s, simply fading away the memories of where they were. And a lot of times we get wrapped up in so many things and so many memories and so many good times that when people come along in our lives that we've never met in person and they connect with us, then we know we're on to something. And that is exactly what I want to show you now. You all know what the old stops look like that are placed when the funeral home does the service. But what I'm about to show you blew my mind. It melted my heart. It brought tears to my eyes because Tim and Jimmy were really, really good friends of mine. And back then we didn't have that chance, that opportunity to always be together because of the outside interference, or maybe just the fact that we were all doing our own personal things and lost contact. But when we came back, we realized we all had a lot in common, and that was a place that when we all go through our natural stages of life, there comes a time and place that we all are going to be resting with our Creator, all of us. So at this time, I want to turn this around and show what we were looking at this area that we have actually come together and actually allowed Tim and Jimmy to finally find some peace and some comfort in knowing that they're not forgotten and that they were never ever just a game to us who cared and loved. They were never just someone who popped up in our lives for a reason. They were here for a reason, to keep the generations like myself alive and well and continuing to grow.
Again, like I said about knowing that I really wanted to see this marker replaced, it has kind of gutted me for the last 10 months that I've been aware of all of this, for me to think how many people, even who went to Files Cemetery to attempt to pay their respects to HIV and AIDS victims buried there after Ruth made it famous, just completely walked past that initial grave marker. It is a huge, huge relief for me to know that that will not happen again. That they get the same kind of dignity, that they get the same kind of marker as plenty of other couples in that cemetery and others like it have. I just thought what Tim said was really, really beautiful, and I wanted to use it here.
And today, what I want to do is I'm going to scoot over here and show you what has happened from communities outside of the local area who come together, believed in the cause, heard the story about these two wonderful people, and how much was cheated out of everything that they could have done. But with that being said, Timothy Edward Gentry, Jimmy Gleason Kelly, these are from loved ones who fell in love with your story from day one. And it's a little bit of glare, but it's beautiful. They're finally resting in peace at a beautiful place together. Their names are there, their dates are there. Their lives are there. Their lives were very important to me. Their lives were very important to a lot of people. Let us learn from love. Let us learn from peace and share light.
I actually told the guy I was chatting with UPS when we had some delivery issues, I said, this is for a memorial for loved ones. And that is true, even though I didn't get a chance to get to know Tim and Jimmy. These men were in their 30s, and I mean, in Tim Gentry's case, he was just barely. I'm 25. These are people who would have been my peers had I been born a few decades earlier. These are people who could and should still be here, and they're people who are survived by the people who were actually part of their lives. People who are still there to tell stories about them, who are still there to remember them. Even if the story that Ruth tells is true, it never would have been the most important part of anybody's story, and it certainly isn't the only part that deserves to be remembered. Jim and Tim loved each other, and they wanted to be buried together, and they got that wish. And a couple of decades later, because of the fact that somebody who was friends with them and who remembers them fondly was able to connect with a handful of chronically ill lesbians from the internet, we were able to do something to memorialize that love. I'm going to stay really proud of that for the rest of my life, in the same way that I think that Ruth Coker Burks should feel ashamed of letting that memorial get to the state that it was in for the rest of hers.
This is the old standard marker that a lot of people simply get placed in there because the loved ones are not close by, or there's no one to keep the upkeep on the property, that type of thing. But as we got this going, and I'm blown away, and I hope that this opens up a door of peace. It opens up a door of reaching out to the community, and let us all know that we all have one thing in common, and that's love, the love for our friends and our family. There's so many times that we don't realize that there's outsiders out there who actually are not really outsiders, they're insiders. They're watching from afar, and they're celebrating our purpose, our history, and our love. I'll be back, my friends, to do a little landscaping, and let's give some color to this beautiful area. And everyone that would, I ask that you give a big thank you and a big blessings for the people who came across this project for us and actually made this an amazing adventure. Bless you all, blessed be, and thank you, Ophi and Kit. And they will go into that, like I said, at a later day and explain how this all came. But peace, love, and light. And I love you, Tim. I love you, Jimmy. May you find peace and rest, and let the love story of that decade go on and on. Namaste.
So I genuinely hope that this far into the video, it's already pretty clear why I'm so upset about this, right? So that GoFundMe grift, and how when an angel did eventually appear, credit wasn't even taken for that by Ruth, and it certainly did not cost the full extent of the GoFundMe money.
We're not even sure if that angel out there is now even from her, if somebody else did it. But the angel that they put in there, that's maybe 5 foot tall, its back's toward the whole grave parts where she did bury them. So if she put that angel in there, did she deliberately turn the angel around to turn her back on it, or whoever put it in there was facing it toward the woods on purpose? It's weird, but it's not the $68,000 that was raised that she's got sued for to pay back with GoFundMe. It's probably a $4,000 or $5,000 statue that come from probably a tombstone. What do you call them? Where they make your headstones and stuff. That's what it looks like. A decoration for a cemetery, not a. It would be something you would put on your family lot instead of a centerpiece for the whole cemetery. You know what I'm saying? And it's nowhere near her family or the clients that she buried. In fact, it's probably about 30 feet away, and its back is to all that.
Of course, she claimed that she buried Jimmy on top of her daddy. And what's strange is anybody that was in the HIV community at the time is actually at least 50 feet away from any of her family's sight. They're here. The others are over here. Thus, the angel is actually facing the woods, like I said, but the back is toward her family and Jimmy, Tim, and all the others that's on this side. So I could understand someone coming in out of spite to say, oh, look what I did. Here's the angel. But why is it turning its back toward the very person who claims to be the angel and the people she took care of? So I don't think she did that. I don't think there's a connection there. If there is, you would think that she would step up at that opportunity and brag about it and take the opportunity to embellish what she did. But instead, she didn't even come to the Conway Pride, where she was scheduled to have breakout sessions during Conway Pride and Little Rock Pride. She was the guest speaker, and she never showed up. So they had to shuffle side classes at the last minute because they only had 2 of the 5 speakers, including her, who was supposed to come represent her legacy. And she was a no-show. The first of this month, the first of Pride Month, as our picnic and walk was taking place, this was all going in Conway, and we sent some of our people over there to experience this. I didn't want to go because she was going to be one of the guest speakers. So I sent someone in my place. They went and stayed all day, and they announced like at 9:30 in the morning she would not be attending because she was a no-show, and they could not get a hold of her. So I don't think she's coming to Hot Springs. She's not going to cancel a gig like that where she could, surprise, I'm back in the map. I'm in Conway, Hot Springs, Little Rock. She would have embellished and loved and taken advantage of that opportunity. She knows. Something in my mind tells me she's shutting up because she has to. You know, there's those things called gag orders. You know, what transpired after she was sued from GoFundMe? Nobody heard a word after that. So, like I said, this is something that's going to continue to go on and on and on and on and on and on, because my intentions is to continue to pay notice to the people who's out there and who's been a victim of this. Because, like I said, if she's going to be a guest speaker and be a no-show and have the opportunity, this would have been perfect fuel for her little game. And I don't think that angel in that cemetery has anything other in their coincidence. Somebody else stepped up, thought, oh, I want to do this, and had no idea where anybody was at. So they put it in the middle of the cemetery, facing the opposite way, where nobody would get the connection. I would love the opportunity to find out where that came from, who sent it, just to disprove anybody's mind thinking Ruth did that. I used to be convinced.
If somebody watches this video and they know where that angel statue in File Cemetery came from, please let us know. Comment below.
Absolutely.
Send
because
me an
honestly,
email. Tell me, please.
We'll make a whole follow-up.
Yes, please. We'll continue this for years. So this is how we continue. I'm going to find out where it came from, because once we do that, will dispel any thought in our minds who and why they did this. You know, and if it's a justification for you stealing $63,000 by putting a $6,000 statue up, then we still have issues with you, lady. But at first, that was my first instinct. She did this just upstage and just to say what she did. I no longer believe that, because that's a good thing that happened. And she got caught. She's not going to try to correct something because it's going to make her look guilty.
Remember earlier I said the lawyer will bullshit us later. The lawyer had a lot of excuses for why that memorial was never built, including the fact that Ruth had never built a memorial before. And she was trying to claim all kinds of things about how long it takes that just patently are not true. The lawyer tries to bullshit that actually the stated goal always was that it was a dual purpose, even though, like I said, that dual purpose was lower ranked on the purpose list. The lawyer says that Ruth felt pressured. Ruth claims that she never said that she had all of the names, even though she has. $70,000. A book deal. I don't know how much her book advance was. Probably a lot. It was probably a lot of money. She split it with her co-writer, and I hope that's worth the cost of their soul, but it was probably a lot of money. That money didn't go towards a memorial for all of the AIDS victims because she does not have names that she will provide for people who she says that she buried herself during these overnights. And I will never say that none of them exist, because I can never know that for sure. And nobody is ever going to dig up Files Cemetery to check, nor should they, because not only are there AIDS victims who are buried there, but also lots of other people who are buried there. I don't think at all that just because it seems like Ruth is greatly exaggerating her numbers that we should set the precedent of exhuming a graveyard to check somebody's claims. But I think we also should maybe set the precedent of not letting somebody tell increasingly outlandish lies and praising them as if they are the second coming of Princess Diana. It is such a disservice to these men, to Hot Springs, Arkansas as a city, and to everybody who lives there and who loves that place, to let Ruth tell this story the way that she tells it, to let her portray these people the way that she portrays them, to let Ruth tell a story of the world where she was the only beautiful thing to come out of Hot Springs, Arkansas, when that is not true. What Ruth did, for whatever amount of men she did it for, was beautiful. And it was also the exact kind of care work that so many people within our community provided to each other at the time. And they are not praised for it. They do not get book deals to talk about the time that they sat with their dying lover. But we give book deals to people who were not affected, who want to tell a story that barely even remembers to circle back around to the people who are affected by the thing it says on the title that it's about. People who want to tell these stories because they are about themselves. They are about themselves and the gay community as a little thing that they looked at in the 1990s. Ruth loves the phrasing that she became effectively obsolete because of better medical advancements. I referred to this earlier as opt-in obsolescence, and I think that that is the best description for what Ruth has done, and that it is fine. It is fine and so normal for somebody not to be able to be an activist for the rest of your life. But once you're done doing it, stop trying to be famous off of it. Once you are done putting in the work, stop grasping for the credit for work that you may have done decades ago. Stop using your involvement to override the people who were actually there and actually involved. I don't want Ruth Coker Burks to be remembered in the way that I initially remembered that her story existed when I thought of all of this when I was looking at making this video for the first time last year. I don't want her in our rankings of people who genuinely gave a shit about our community, because even if she did, that seems to be long fucking over by now. What is she doing? Where has she been? I've looked at her Twitter. I saw her sharing without comment some post about masks causing stillbirths. I see her promoting her own book over and over again there whenever anybody tweets something looking for a book recommendation when it first came out. Where is she? Why did she decide to come back only to make herself famous off of this and not to get involved with it again? AIDS work is not obsolete because AIDS is not over. She does not need to spend the rest of her life in these trenches, but she also should not get to have a $70,000 grift at the expense of people who are no longer alive to speak for themselves, not be what is centrally remembered in her legacy. Ruth Coker Burks said she has a list of names and she refused to provide them. She still refused to provide them even after Robert Clintworth put a banner up at Files Cemetery asking for the names and demanding to know where the monument was. There is no confirmation that the small angel statue currently in Vile Cemetery had anything to do with Ruth, and even if it did, there is absolutely no way that it cost even half of the money that was raised from that GoFundMe. And even if it was from the GoFundMe money, it does not include the names, which was always the most crucial part of giving a memorial to these people who did not have grave markers to begin with. Ruth Coker Burks' story is beautiful and heartbreaking, and I can't tell you with any certainty what level of it is true. What I can tell you is that there is an AIDS clinic in Arkansas that was opened because two people were so loved by their family despite their diagnosis that nuns and a social worker and a doctor who has been there this entire time came together and made something that still exists and that still helps people. Ruth's story depends on there being this one central angel, this one figure, this one person who was doing all of the good that there was to be done in Arkansas. And it's not true. I don't think that there's not a world where she could have gotten credit for what she did, but I also don't think that there is any path in this universe unless she comes forward and says, hey, yeah, I'm really sorry, I got carried away. Here's the actual list of names, and I'm sorry and embarrassed that it's so much shorter than I said it was. I don't think that there's another route where she deserves to be remembered for anything other than the fact that she did something kind and then made it into something much, much larger that she could get extremely famous off of. We can't allow this to be lucrative. We need to focus on the way that we help each other, both because that actually gets us helped and because it keeps us from letting people like this do this kind of shit to us, because they will. Again and again, they will. The amount of people who died during the AIDS crisis is an injustice. To turn around and then profit off of an injustice once the people who were wronged by that injustice cannot fact check you any longer is genuinely despicable to me. I'm making this video about somebody who I once held in some of the highest esteem I could possibly even muster. And I think that she is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the worst person I have ever or likely will talk about on this channel. Ruth Coker Burks, a woman who may have done something I find really beautiful and meaningful, for things that I know she has done since then, absolutely and completely, thoroughly disgusts me. I'm at a bit of a crossroads here, because on the one hand, I'm very close to being able to just be done talking about Ruth Coker Burks, which you will soon learn has been a long time goal of this video. But on the other hand, there are also just a few more things about this book that are really, really terrible, and also yet not quite on the same scale as some of the other things we've discussed, which is why I am moving from like a full-fledged book review to kind of giving you more of a speed round of some of my criticisms of this book that are like still bad, but maybe less cartoon villain of Ruth. Basically, if anybody is looking for some things to look for if they want to get this book from their library and maybe leave a Goodreads review to help balance the score out, these are some things that would be in mine if that had been the route that I had consumed this book. Number one, Ruth is obsessed with telling you how hot everybody thought she was. Number two, to prove that, she tells stories that are obvious lies because, number three, Ruth Coker Burks thinks you're an idiot. Some examples that prove all three of those points, stories about her boss asking her to sunbathe at work, which already struck me as pretty ridiculous, before she said, not, oh, and I was so beautiful I turned heads, but she says that helicopter pilots in helicopters would fly low overhead to gawk at her. And I'm not saying she wasn't a perfectly fine-looking lady. I'm just saying that did not happen. There are a lot of things in this book that very much did not happen, but like helicopter pilots flying low overhead to look at how sexy Ruth Coker Burks was while she was sunbathing at work like her boss asked her to, that didn't happen. Something I do believe happened, because she takes a, suspicious amount of joy in retelling it page after page after page, is that she had a close friend who spewed some pretty nasty homophobic rhetoric. It feels like an excuse to just say all that shit, now that I know that it kind of sounds like the kind of things that we have heard alleged she was saying in private, and that they're said by this character who doesn't get told, hey, shut up, I love these people. It's like, oh, I have a friend who's homophobic, and that makes the fact that I like gay people sometimes really hard.
Could you not have just said that they didn't need to be going to those kind of places at the time because people were not telling of your status and said, oh, he's wearing Daisy Dukes looking like a queer, and that's her. That's why you're picking up on the vibes about how she treats people. And you mean to tell me they're not dead yet? Yeah. Out of her mouth. And this was 5 years ago. So, yeah, there's a lot more to it, and we can get into those things. But like I said, that was one of the things that come out of her mouth. Comments like, if they would have got off of the cocaine and kept their bleed in their britches, they wouldn't have got this to start with. Yeah, just off the cuff stuff that is totally contradictory to the book.
And the cruelty that friend has towards gay people is very similar to a kind of cruelty that Ruth herself has towards one of her friends. So from day one, Ruth has been saying that day that she was in the hospital when she met Jimmy, she was there because she was caring for a friend of hers after she had a tongue amputation. This is relevant because that tongue amputation is mentioned several times throughout the book in a way where Ruth uses the word quack, where a normal or empathetic or humane person would say said. She uses the word quack to describe how her friend with a tongue amputation speaks. And as if that is not already offensive enough, she also refers to it as awful, as a cartoon duck voice. Talks about making her friend speak aloud when other people didn't like the sound of her friend's voice so that they would get helped, so that they would get rushed through places. It's disgusting, and it's also the same way that she talks about making her guys dress up in visibly gay ways because she wanted people to see them, assume, oh, they have AIDS, and rush them in and out of government care buildings. Something that she does merely pages after having said that she was not going to take one of those men to Walmart because he was wearing those shorts. So it's okay for them to look gay when Ruth benefits from it, but when she feels vaguely embarrassed or off-put, no, no, no. And that's what I mean by her thinking that I'm stupid. I'm supposed to read a book by an angel who tells a man who is sick of HIV and who wants to wear his fucking Daisy Dukes to Walmart, I can't take that to Walmart. Fuck you. I can't take that to Walmart. That's what she says. I can't take that to Walmart. And that's an angel? And that's an angel. That's an angel that is saying that to a dying man and then publishing it years and years and years after his death, while the cremation tag is sitting there getting moldy. That's an angel saying that. Genuinely, just how stupid does she think I am? Ruth Coker Burks is so vain, so self-obsessed and callous, and such an obvious bullshitter that even a ghostwriter could not manage to make her likable for a couple hundred pages. Though, looking at some other celebrity memoirs Kevin Carr O'Leary has written before, I think maybe I shouldn't have had very high expectations of him in the first place. Looks like All the Young Men was his first attempt at doing something serious because nobody buys any of his other books. Kevin Carr O'Leary is clearly not off of my shit list, so let's talk about that. Kevin is a celebrity memoirist. He seems to have written a handful of celebrity memoirs before. I've heard at least the Jessica Simpson one was not enjoyable to read, but I haven't personally attempted to slog my way through any of this man's other bullshit besides All the Young Men, so maybe I have begun at the very depths of the worst thing that this man could write, and there's nowhere to go but up, but, we've got a pretty good, clear indication here that nothing this man says is ever really based in truth. So, based on this experience of reading a Kevin Carr O'Leary memoir, I'm assuming I probably could apply a lot of skepticism to anything else he's ever claimed just as outright as it happened in his other memoirs, right? But I don't even care quite so much about those other celebrity memoirs, you know, like whatever, he took a swing. He thought maybe if he wrote something serious, people would read it and he would be remembered fondly. And then he filled it with bullshit. Kevin Carr O'Leary is a gay man, like a lot of the other people who Ruth has conned into perpetuating her angel legacy. But Kevin Carr O'Leary is a gay man who was not there during the AIDS crisis when she was there in Hot Springs. Kevin Carr O'Leary did not see her do any of these things that she made claims that he wrote a book about. And Kevin Carr O'Leary, who is not a loved one of any of the people who she profits off of in this book, is the only gay man in her Rolodex of gay men who she will use and extract any amount of value from and then discard, who has gotten paid into that scheme at all. Nobody else has gotten to profit off of this besides Ruth and Kevin Carr O'Leary. And even if this book was well written or enjoyable or about somebody likable, it's so full of lies that, you know, no amount of advance would have been worth the cost. I mean, I already joked that they sold their souls, and the only thing keeping me from being serious about that is I'm not sure how much I believe in the concept of a soul, but like, what a permanent tarnish on the career of what already seems to be a pretty mid to mediocre memoirist. And even if not for the tarnish, the cost of this book. This book was published at the cost of any integrity in the way that the stories of the men who were buried in it could have had in the telling of their life after the fact. It was at the cost of the reputation of a small town that they portrayed as being backwards and antagonistic and incredibly homophobic, and that Kevin Carr O'Leary seems to have spent maybe a couple of overnights in at best, and that Ruth moved away from and never moved back to, even when she was trying to profit off of the town as she was making it look as horrible as possible in all of her press. I don't know how much of this book Kevin actually wrote. I mean, I assume part of the deal here when you are a celebrity memoirist and they hook you up with somebody like Ruth is that he met up with her and she bullshitted him for a few hours, maybe a couple days. So he went home and he thought, oh my God, I'm going to get out of writing these trashy celebrity memoirs nobody reads. I'm going to write something really important. And then Kevin went home and attempted to spin hours and hours and hours of clear lies and exaggerations and cruel shit, Ruth Coker Burks said, into something vaguely believable and enjoyable, and he failed. He failed. He wrote a bad book that centralizes the white woman who did a lot less than she said she did, and he allowed her hundreds of pages of her own mythology that cannot be fact-checked. And also, just by being a gay man who was willing to profit off of this, he gave her a big old check mark. This is fine. We're cool with this. The gay people still like Ruth. She's gonna give one of us some money. Kevin Carr O'Leary disgusts me too. It's not just Ruth. Kevin could make a statement and say, hey, I'm really sorry, Ruth lied to me and I think she sucks, and that would change some of my perspective of him, but honestly, it wouldn't make me come around on wanting to delete this portion of the video. This is a grown man. He should have known better. He shouldn't have written this book when so much of it is so obviously full of shit. I know that it is not, like, standard practice for memoir publishers to, like, fact check all of this stuff. Apparently, that's what Ruth's publisher said when asked about all of this. But just morally as a gay person, if I were to want to make this video, like I did, to want to make a video to talk about the AIDS crisis, and then to make it more impressive, I let the person that I interviewed count people multiple times, I would be bad. I would be doing a disservice. Kevin Carr O'Leary did a disservice. The kindest word that I can give to what Kevin Carr O'Leary has done to the gay community, to Files Cemetery, to the history of the men who were buried there, is a disservice. Beyond Kevin Carr O'Leary's participation striking me as incredibly shameful, and aside from, so much else about Ruth that we've already gotten into, I think the thing that was most affronting for me when I was reading this book, though, to kind of circle back to that quick list, was number 3. Ruth Coker Burks thinks you're an idiot. I mean, not just you, me too, all of us. She thinks we're all really incredibly, incredibly foolish. She thinks that she can tell us lie after lie and feed us bullshit for pages and pages and chapters, and then also sneak in this little story about some other woman who also was profiting off of trotting out AIDS patients to make people feel bad for her. Ruth tells a story about some woman passing around a collection plate, and she says, because she thinks she's so much smarter than us, and because she thinks she's the only person who has this skill, apparently, she says, "I know a con artist when I see one." Ruth Coker Burks and I actually have a lot in common. We both grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and then later moved away from it. I currently am the age that she says she was when she met Jimmy in the hospital, 25 years old. And just one more thing Ruth and I have in common. I, too, know a con artist when I see one.
So my thing is there was a point in time when there was an angel in town stealing, and those same people that she stole from, it killed them because she refused to get them medical help because she thought she had all the answers. I can remember conversations and things that we had talked about, things that happened at the cemetery that now were the biggest red flags that I should have saw years ago, especially when she was in the churches trying to raise money and yet talking about them behind their backs like she was the victim. I'm having to do this and I can't afford it. They only reach out to me. All those things are coming back to me now in those pathetic speeches and trying to raise money. Where did the money go?
Even the vanishingly few people who she trots out to corroborate her story do themselves, in a way, sort of make a lot of her claims weaker. Because isn't that a double-edged sword? You can prove the existence of some gay people that you helped bury in Hot Springs, Arkansas, but only because their relatives and loved ones who loved them at the time are still there to talk about that. Kind of sounds like maybe it wasn't only Ruth who cared about people. Kind of makes it sound like maybe it wasn't only Ruth who still loved people when they were sick. Doesn't it? Because those families that she trots out to talk about what an angel she is and how much she helped them, that's included in that figure of 5 that Tim gave earlier. I want to mention it because I don't want to discredit their existence or leave open a big empty gap where somebody will say, well, Ophi YouTube videos just didn't mention that people have said Ruth helped them. No, I know Ruth has helped some people. But those people she's able to provide proof for, again, like how we know that the end for Billy wasn't as it was portrayed in the short film about her, the proof of the people who really exist all happen to not at all have had that story that she claims happened again and again and again, starting with Jimmy, where she would sit in the hospital with people while they passed and then bury them because their family would not bury them. Claims that she makes that she has marked down somewhere upstairs with that list of names where everybody was buried because she would let them pick out the space in the cemetery out of her 262 plots that don't actually exist. She refuses to provide any evidence for the people who don't already have gravestones that other people were involved with having put in Files Cemetery for these people. Ruth was involved, yes, but so were other people. That's how these things happen. And she refuses to provide any information about any of the things that she knows she is the only person who can provide information for. Why do you think that is? Who does that other than a con artist? Ruth also attempted, through her lawyer, like I said, to discredit everybody quoted in those articles about her from 2021. Tim Looper, Robert Clintworth, people who she actually knew in real life, and also Travis, who she discarded, again, as soon as he stopped providing value to her, once he paused that GoFundMe. And that's just a pattern that I think we need to be very, very aware of as we talk about Ruth Coker Burks and what she has or has not done. Yes, she did do something enormously kind for the few people that we know that she did that for. She also severely disrespected the memory of people who she did name in her book, including the memory of two men who loved each other, whose graves she let sit and be just the molded cremation tag from the 90s. And also, she lied several times, but like about a foundation being worked on. And also, either she was lying when she said there's a list of names, or she was lying when she said, I never said there was a list of names, because those two things cannot both be true. She lied about owning Files Cemetery. She lied and said that when she got her book advance, she would pay back all of the money that she had funneled from the GoFundMe. And she didn't. Ruth Coker Burks did provide a handful of people with help being buried in Files Cemetery. And despite severe misgivings that I really don't even feel like I want to repeat to get into about the way that she handled this particular person's story in her book, I do believe that at least in the case of Billy, who you can read more about in those Today and Arkansas Times articles from 2021, Ruth did love him. I'm not going to say that she didn't. I'm not going to say that she never had anybody who she was ever close with pass of AIDS and that wasn't incredibly traumatic and also meaningful to her. But she then treated that person very, very unkindly in her book. She treated his surviving partner and the partner of his surviving partner incredibly, incredibly unkindly in her actions and the statement she made through her lawyer in that 2021 article. And before that 2021 article, she had already published a book that spent a considerable amount of time in its conclusion just boo-hooing that after funding was finally made available for AIDS research and work being done amongst that population, that she was not given a high-paying job. The way she complains about it is she says people with letters behind their names came to town and took all of the jobs. She frames it, all of this, as if the true injustice is so much less the AIDS crisis itself and the loss of life there, and the fact that she hung out doing something for a few years and then didn't immediately get a high-paying job about it when she didn't have any actual qualifications, training, expertise, or degrees. I'm sorry, I just don't think that's an actual issue. I think people who have experience and education should be the people treating people who are dying, because then those people can live longer. I will never diminish the work of sitting with somebody and making them comfortable while they pass away. But again, that is never the most important thing. It is never the thing that should be most praised or the highest paying thing. We should be rewarding people who have an interest in helping people live. We should be rewarding the people who have an interest and a capability to help people live. Ruth Coker Burks is not an angel. She's not even currently any kind of activist, though her website, which also says, be brave, be authentic, be of service, describes her as an activist and also apparently as available for hire to talk at events. She's not an angel. She is an opportunistic woman who has by now a really clear pattern of using and extracting any potential value from gay men before she discards them and attempts to make them look bad. We have seen how she uses and discards the men who died themselves, that constantly inflating anonymous number, as well as the people she has known, and the families who still loved their sons as they died of AIDS, who exist only when they are able to bolster Ruth's claims of being angelic, and not in her claims of what things were like at the time in Hot Springs. We see it with her attempt to make it look like Travis was pressuring her and that the statue construction was something she couldn't handle and not something she had said she was going to do. And we see it with the way that she got so mad in her book about these people with letters behind their names that she simply decided not to give any credit to anything that they had been doing before that time, which, as of the timelines that I was provided, Toggle Clinic was founded beginning in 1991, so before Ruth had decided she became effectively obsolete. She just doesn't mention them because she's mad that that is not something she can take credit for the way everything else she tells in this book is. I can't validate her claims about having had a job as a White House liaison to do with AIDS. It seems to be many, many things she's saying to make it seem like Bill Clinton was a lot more finger on the pulse about AIDS than he was. They were friends. He did provide a pull quote for her book, but again, I haven't seen anything actually confirming that she had any kind of White House job to do with AIDS. And it doesn't it kind of call into question her claims about how all of her previous AIDS activism got her blacklisted and unable to find work? Like, if you had a job with the White House, wouldn't that be like a good thing on your resume? Or also, she could have just not put the thing that she was doing that wasn't a job on her resume. I genuinely, I don't know what kind of job she expected she was going to get from having been very involved in helping people to be buried during a large-scale loss of life event, and then the losses of life suddenly slowed. I don't know what she thought was going to happen.
And come to find out, she outright lied to Bill Clinton when he gave her the honorary thing for the HIV, gave him this big, we went to school together and I'm doing this in Hot Springs now and I've been taking care of these people, blah, blah. And he presented her the Advocacy Award back in the day, which made him look like a fool, because you would think as president of the United States at the time that you would have done your homework. Of course, his homework kind of caught up with him every once in a while. So there's that. But just the fact that she knew enough people to claim that could back her up, and the normal Tom, Jane, and Doe and Dick or whoever don't have contact with Bill Clinton, so they couldn't disprove it. The only people that could disprove it is those that she had in contact with all through the decades, and there wasn't a lot of people that stuck with her. You either stuck with her or you didn't, and those like myself who continued to talk to her and go out there and do the things that needed to be done and do it as a community thing. But yeah, then you read the book. And here we are.
We have officially reached the part of the video where I initially had used those Daymon Jones quotes that I decided instead to start us off with today. About how Hot Springs, Arkansas is not the dump hole that she is trying to make it look like it is.
So my thing is thank you. I did like the clipping with you added with Daymon in there and everything. The timing of everything was set in motion. And now there's a whole new story to tell about him. And he's going to be one of those others like Jim and Timmy that didn't get a chance to justify, didn't get to tell people what really happened. They didn't get that chance because they were not being taken care of properly at all in any way. And of course, that kept them, it could have saved, they could have been another Daymon. They could still be alive and themselves, but they weren't taking medicine. They were still drinking. They were still partying and living the fast lane. And that's why I can understand why she would find privilege in claiming she was around these people, hanging with them, taking care of them, when in reality, it was the total opposite. It was like victimizing them. I see an opportunity. It was an opportunity for her. And I think that now that Daymon's gone and his history can be told, that's a story of history. Everything that he was going through in life and suffering from, he was taking care of the exact same people that he had the same issues as they did. So not only was the 80s a complicated time and not a lot of education out there about HIV, he was a book of knowledge. And Mike tells us all the time that meeting Daymon Jones was the best thing that ever happened to him in his profession, because Daymon taught him more about HIV infection than he ever learned in a book. Because he had to have that connection to somebody who, from day one, went through that trauma. I mean, he was in the military, married, and got a divorce, and all in the same year contacted HIV. So you're losing your family, you're losing your wife, your kids, your career. You get kicked out of the military because you come out. You lose everything to start over for the fight of your life. And My only regret is that I did not reach out in a stronger manner within the last 5 years to try to reconnect. But as I've seen the disease progress and everything, I've realized now it was mostly a mental anguish and bitterness and tiredness from himself. And he used to tell people HIV was the best thing that ever happened to me. What? I just, dude, that's just almost wrong to say on your own self, because it's like you're punishing yourself and believing that people think you deserve this. He says, no, that's not it. He said, had I not got HIV, I would have already been dead from either alcoholism, murder somebody, where I ripped somebody off, or a drug deal gone wrong, car wreck. Anything could have happened to me, but it didn't. I got HIV, and I have to make the best of it. So this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And he would tell Mike that. Mike's like, dude, why do you say that? It's almost like saying, I'm glad I got it. And it is, because he thinks that had he not been diagnosed with it, he probably would still continue to live in the fast lane, continue to unknowingly spread it, or even worse, find out one day, you're HIV positive and get killed in a car wreck. But that never happened. Of all the things that could have happened to Daymon Jones, it didn't. And I look back now, and it was because he as a person was a gift to the community itself, to the education of HIV at large, and was actually able to help open the Hot Springs Age Resources and direct the director on how to deal with people, and actually started pulling in the people he knew as first clients. So without Daymon, the clinic would never existed, because there would not been him, number one, the first client, to educate, go to these high schools. They went to high schools, local high schools and everything, and talked about HIV to the kids. They had to stop because he was telling the kids to tell your parents to buy you some condoms, and that didn't go across too well because they were 13, 14, 15. But at the time, the Surgeon General under Bill Clinton, Jocelyn Elders, was telling people, wear condoms and masturbation. That's how you keep from getting pregnant and spreading diseases. But out of all the things I can say with Daymon was the fact that when push come to shove, he had your back. And maybe he was arrogant and rude and outspoken and a pain in the butt sometimes, but so was I. It was an exterior we had to put on to play tough. If we're out there teaching a subject and trying to prevent people from going through the same thing that he was going through, then you have to be serious and show people that you're done with those play days. The picking up and the cruising and those things are all really crucial to let's stop in this. And he was crucial into getting that across to people, because he was in his 20s and they were teenagers thinking, oh my God, he's only 5-6 years older than us, and this could happen to anyone. So when it comes down to the education, I think Daymon Jones is probably the biggest key factor in keeping Mike and the AIDS Resources continuing to strive, because they had to protect him, and they had to keep him alive and protect him. And when they did, it opened up the door for him to do the same to a lot of people. But like I said, out of all that time, that's what's sad, is he was the one with Mike doing the fundraisers. He was the one with Mike until Daymon Jones announced in the bar on a Saturday night, as everybody's dancing on the bar to We Are Family. He stops the DJ and gets on the microphone in the bar in front of 200 people or more and tells everybody, I just found out I'm infected with HIV. If you slept with me, go to the doctor. If you haven't, put a condom on. You ain't getting no more. I mean, just told his whole HIV. He told everybody in the bar that he was infected with HIV and even singled out. And I know I got it from one of y'all in this bar because it's the only one I'm dating. But it was just like everybody that knew Daymon knew from day one that it was positive. And I think a lot of people's lives were, I know a lot of people's lives were saved by watching him, because at the time we had all these other people that we've talking about, the 4 or 5 in the cemetery, and then there's the others that were buried in other cemeteries by family members who died immediately. His life was spared at that time, and I thank God that he and Ruth were not friends in any manner. So Daymon Jones was the icing of truth that needed to back a lot of us up to prove that we just were not in this for revenge. It wasn't personal. It is now because it is. But it was never a personal thing for me because I don't care. I didn't want my name in the book. I don't want my business being told. So therefore, with me being left out and him left out and being two of the main key players of this whole saga that could disprove her, had the opportunity to do it. Had it not been for Daymon's comments, a lot of us would not have tackled that and ran with it. Because I'll be honest, at the time, a lot of things, when it comes to being a dependable source, it depended on what kind of mood he was in. Okay. Men are drama queens. All of us. And there was a lot of drama between the two of us, but there was never any to the point that I would say, you know what, dude, you're wrong on this. Because I remember her. I didn't have to. We were there side by side the whole time, hanging out on a daily basis. I had a lady I worked for. I did caregiving, and she would give me sacks and sacks of food, and I would take it to his house, and he would take what he needed, and the other he would donate to Hot Springs AIDS Resources, which was the pantry at the time, which still is. It's Mike still has that, but it's a completely different office. It's out of the Togo Clinic perimeter. But just the fact that he had the knowledge to step in as a nurse role and work in the office with Mike like that voluntarily and have enough knowledge to know how to do correct blood pressures, know how to read charts and say, oh, well, your T cells are a little high, a little low. This is that. You need to do this. You need to kind of operate. Now get up and go see the doctor. That kind of thing. He knew what he was talking about. He knew everything about the whole matter that he probably, other than a medical doctor that has a degree in Arkansas at the time, like John Allen or the other HIV specialist, I can't remember his name, that Daymon went to. It's been so long ago. But now there's more than that. But at the time, there was only 2 in the state. So he had to travel to Little Rock every time he went because there was nobody in Hot Springs until Mike came into the picture and Dr. Shelby and Daymon and the Caldwells, who opened up their home to do it there. So, yeah, with that being said, the only thing I can say is my hat's off. Had I not been friends with this individual, I would have still had so much respect and love because he was actually looking out for the betterment of the community and never intended, never wanted, never asked for any glory out of any of it. Never operated, never took a dime for these adventures, never took a dime to speak. He didn't do any of that stuff. So when it comes down to it, as a survivor and not being a victim, Daymon Jones is in the center and the heart of all of this because he knew all these people that she claimed that she took care of and didn't, because they were not coming to a official office of operation. There was nowhere else to go. So I think that's why he was so adamant about making his tenure last. He drug his life out on purpose just to say he did. So my thing is I hope that somehow part of this reached him somehow before he transitioned. And if not, I'm sure he's smiling like a big shit-eating grin, just thinking, yeah. And he's probably also saying, I did this You know, that's how he operated.
He did. He did. That quote, those quotes in the Today article. I mean, I know I say it at the beginning of the video, but I specifically remember me and Kit sending those quotes back and forth to each other and being like, the way he lays this out, it's so ghoulish, and he does such a good job of just saying, this is exactly what it is. I'm not giving you any bullshit about it. This is what she said. This is what was really important. You know, that has always been like so included in the foundation of what we wanted to do.
Right.
I love to think that he has a shit-eating grin about this project.
He does. He does. He does. He planned his own. Here's the deal. There was no obituary, nothing. He planned everything, wrote it down, gave it to his partner, and said, okay, 5 days after I'm dead, I want you to put this on Facebook, not in the paper, anything else. He wrote his own tribute. Come on, dude. And he mentioned the whole thing. Mike, the clinic, being an advocate. I mean, he wrote the whole story.
Could you send that to me, please?
I will.
Thank you.
I will do that. I actually have the screenshots. But yeah, he was highly offended when she talked about how bad and racist and horrible it was here during that time, because that just was not true. It was not true, as we've talked about over and over.
And I mean, I do have more to say about it, and more that I already have said about it that you just haven't seen yet. But really, all I can truly say is that he was right. It's not. Hot Springs, Arkansas is this tiny little resort city in the Bible Belt of the southern United States of America. It's deeply proud of its history, its place as being one of the first national reserves in the country. They're very proud of being the boyhood home of Bill Clinton. Hot Springs is also known as Spa City because it is the home of Bathhouse Row in the historic district. Bathhouses that have been renovated, some of which are still in operation as museums. Hot Springs is beautiful, and it deserves to be thought of as somewhere beautiful and not the way that Ruth is attempting to frame it. While homophobia did and does exist, especially in southern and rural areas, she has done a lot of damage to the reputation of this town by publishing things like, you know, unsubstantiated claims that she was getting sprayed with Lysol until she left pharmacies because people knew that she worked with AIDS victims, or other things that other people who worked with AIDS victims on public levels, like Ruth did, have never mentioned anything similar happening, like her stories of the KKK burning crosses in her yard multiple times. Would you not think that that also would have happened to the doctor that has been there the whole time? Or the social worker who founded the AIDS clinic, or, you know, the HIV patients themselves? Why would it only happen to Ruth, and why didn't she call the police when it did? Nobody who was in Hot Springs or who has lived in Hot Springs since believed her claims about the KKK, because while there is Confederate and Southern baggage and there are racists and awful people, Hot Springs specifically is this tiny little, somewhat liberal resort town. This was a town that had multiple gay bars in it at one point in the 80s. And she talks about those gay bars, but she also just threatens to stick this town with a reputation as if it is like slightly better than a severely racist and unsafe sundown town, which is just not at all the same level of risk. Hot Springs is not like that. But she paints it like it is. She paints it as if it is filled with nothing but backwards, hateful hicks. And she does that while she's telling you that she loves it, but also while she's telling you that she has never and will never move back to it. So even if she does love it, and even if she, like me, just has reasons why she doesn't currently live in Hot Springs, despite the fact that she feels fondly for the city, she doesn't love it enough not to completely sell out its reputation for her own gain. She certainly doesn't love it as much as Tim Looper does, or anybody else who is still there, living there and actively putting in the work to maintain the gay community there. Work that Ruth hasn't been interested in participating in since she was made functionally obsolete. Before we move into the less Ruth-centered portion of this video, I do want to mention again that musical that I brought up in my introduction. My understanding is that Ruth herself is not involved with the writing or staging of this musical. I will put the information that I just was sent by Tim Looper earlier tonight on the screen. This seems to be like actual Broadway people. Again, this is concerning to me because while she didn't write it and likely won't directly profit off of it, she would in terms of it getting her name out there, making more people buy her terrible book, reading that, and then taking that at face value, right?
So this whole scam from day one. And that's why I like the way that you tied it up about the play, because the scam continues. She claims she's not part of this. She didn't know anything about it. And Jerry says she didn't have anything to do with this. Well, then why are y'all friends on Facebook? He's even publishing, this is not about her. This is not completely about her. It was about the good thing. There's a lot of loud spoken people out there, but when it comes to push and shove, are they pushing the agenda and trying to tell the truth? Or is it just a drama thing to turn it back on someone else? Me. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, I've contacted 10 people today at least. Stop this. If you see it on your page, comment. And Mike was on board too. He told several people, and he just come right out and said that if your organization is going to support this kind of thing, I'm out. But it's also everything that we've done for this last year, our website, our group page, all of our Taco Tuesdays, our dinner nights, our walk, our Pride Parade, and everything that we've got going on a professional basis would totally be destroyed if we allowed people to think we were okay with that, because we're not. We're not. Our mission statement talks about education, services, and community. If it doesn't involve any of those things within the last 30 years, I don't have time for it. I won't feed it anymore.
And even if it wouldn't contribute to her further lining her pockets with the legacy of these men that she so disrespects, it just still would be yet another entry in this big canon of her mythos.
But when I reached out, I was like, I had told him, he said, "Oh, I know who that Jerry Lambert is." I said, "Well, yeah, I know, because he lived here for, back in the early 90s, and then he left for Vegas." But then again, it's back to the point where what has he been doing all this time? If he really wanted to put Hot Springs on the map and show it in a good way, why would he connect it to this story? Oh, because it already had a following.
And if the person writing this latest entry in the Myth of Ruth Coker Burks is also willing to sell out the reputation of Hot Springs, Arkansas, as much as I would love to never have to talk about Ruth Coker Burks again after all of the time that I've had to spend discussing her grifts in this video, we absolutely will be coming back and talking about that one.
And that's why I was just like, he's like, "Well, you shouldn't just be so," and he's blasted it. You all should be proud that someone actually come from that low life place and tried to make something wonderful out of the place. Okay, number one, what did you just say about everybody in Hot Springs that you think you're better than them? So you're going to ride the coattails just like she did, because there's a following already. Not a good one. And I warned him, this is going to catch up with you. You don't want to do this. It's a good story to tell. Okay, whatever. You go for it. And then at the time he was pushing, that he was involved in it. And now there's like no higher hair, but it's because they're the silent partners. Well, they don't want their name on the credits because people could research it. Just like her. I don't go out. I don't socialize like that unless it's a pageant or something where our community can get involved and network off of it. If I can't network off of a local person, then they're not really in my community, and they're not representing what we're trying to do. And this story, it continues with that little handful of pathetic people that want 5 minutes of fame because they really thought they were going to be a character in that story someday. When I was going Broadway in front of 30 people in a little bitty venue off 12th Street or something. Limited audience means limited views. So if only 30 people see it right now, there's no way it's going to be popular. someone in all that direction team and script writing and all that stuff, somebody who wrote that script had to come across a lot of stuff that they never ever intended to put into this. So they're glorifying what she done. And I'm not going to have it. I can't. We'll do everything I can to discredit this and dry up those resources. And here's the thing. We won't get political, but it's almost like watching the landscape of what we're watching right now.
Oh, I am so political on my YouTube channel. You don't have to worry about that at
It's
all.
like everything out of their mouth is a freaking lie over and over. And it's not to the point where they're saying it because they believe it anymore. They're saying it because they know it's not true. And like I said, he was actually Jerry. After I did my homework and I talked to Mike again, I realized, and I had forgotten, Jerry was actually the president of the Hot Springs Age Resources for about a year, and then he just disappeared and moved to Las Vegas. At the same time, she moved to Florida. So you were at a board's position for a year. You were part of this Hot Springs Age Resources that you helped found, but you can't stand with them and support their cause, but you will yet support the person that we have proved is lying and was never here, and you're doing the same thing. And on a national level, he has his own hair products. He does Celine Dion's hair. He has his own hair products. He has written 2 books that went on the best-selling list. Why would you jeopardize all that success to push a bullshit story? Why? Ego, birds of a feather, flock together all the time. And he'd rather try to benefit this. And what it is, I did find out, he and Scott are silent partners in this. They financed it. That's all. And then everything was turned over. The script, that's where the book came in. There was never another book. It was just a little pamphlet that explained the prequel of the book and connecting it to the onstage musical to celebrate that happy time in Hot Springs history that everybody needs to know about. But like I said, when I saw the pictures, there's probably less than 30 seats in that whole place. Invitation only. If you're going to support a community cause, I would want as many damn people packing that place and get a big venue because he can afford that. So why a small little offbeat thing to jumpstart into next year's, oh, we're going big scale Broadway next year? That's going to be the last thing they do because I will shut it down before it happens. That gives us all another year before it hits main stage.
We will discuss what I'm sure will be a terrible musical and what I'm sure will be an even more glaring lack of ethics behind it at a later date once I can procure a copy of that.
So yeah, that small handful of people that still want to hang on, they can't, there's no touching and there's no way that they can keep up with the power of everybody that has been involved in this, that has seen this, that's going to see this. I'm just, when you're done by the end of the year, I'm going to tell you, it's probably going to blow up into something even bigger than you ever expected, because there are people that are just now coming forward to say, I didn't know that about her. You know, I didn't really that well, but I appreciated the cause and I donated 15 years to the cause. What cause? She had no organization, but that's how everything was manipulated to the point it was all hearsay. It was all hearsay. And here we are, what, 2.5 years later, and you still have that out-of-towner squawking about wanting to make a musical about some of the best times in Hot Springs. Well, according to her book, it was the most horrible times she had ever seen. Everybody was dying. Everybody. Everybody. Everybody was dying. Nobody loved each other, cheating on each other. You know the spiel. It was never about trying to save their lives. It was about to control their resources to write a damn book. There's nothing she can do at this point. And I'm like you. I think it has silenced her. It's silenced her legacy. It's silenced her lack of activism, her lack of advocacy. People are looking and searching now. In fact, I even had one ask me, says, well, I was told that Mike worked for her. No, she never did work she didn't work at the clinic or the age resources. Now, with that being said, I don't hear anybody talking about it anymore. The only opportunity I see is when outsiders that was not here from the time she left to the time he left. I wish people success all the time, but if you're doing it in a shady way and you're using someone who used someone, that almost makes you the worst of the two, because she stopped. She stopped in her tracks pushing this stuff. But you got those people out there with money who want to continue to ride on her because she's been silenced. My goal, to silence them all. And with Timmy and Jimmy's story out there, I've had people actually ask me, why would you be willing to tell your personal crap that you went through back then? I don't care, because it was in the past. And if the past is catching up and telling lies and people are getting away with it, then someone else's past has to step in to clarify it. Because without that clarification, we wouldn't have an open communication for this very thing that you're doing. And people have had the opportunity over and over and over to step up and do something positive about this, but instead, they didn't. They didn't. Until the universe stepped in and sent each other of us here to get down to the bottom of it. And like you said, there's going to be spinoff. There's all kinds of good things that has transpired after that. Like Mike talked about, now there's hardly anybody dying in the community from HIV or AIDS. And the only one that died of cancer, and he had it 40 years, so there's so much in that could have been told in her book, in her story, in her life. She had the perfect opportunity to make something of herself. Instead, she was her own worst enemy.
Ruth Coker Burks is not an angel. She does not deserve a musical. She does not deserve to be remembered the way that I am terrified that she will be remembered. And she doesn't even deserve to remain the main focus of this video for any longer than she already has. So, as I said when I initially filmed this portion of the video, because I know that Ruth is desperate for as much of the attention as possible to remain on herself and only herself, though, evidenced by the way she waited until most anybody who had been around at the time and could fact check her was no longer there before she started making her claims again, right? She circled back around to grab for that attention because she wants it so, so bad. And I do think that we should give her some of it. I would love to see other people make videos about Ruth Coker Burks and her scams. I genuinely would. I truly, truly would. I would love it if anybody else making videos would follow in my footsteps in terms of donating all ad revenue from this to the Tuggle Clinic in Hot Springs. But I think Ruth should get plenty of attention for what she has done. I think she should be known as a scammer. I think she should be known as an ally who lied and who overinflated the concept of her own value to a community that she does not give a shit about. I think we should talk about that. I think a lot of people who don't already know about this would love to know about this. But I don't want to keep talking about her. I want to talk about the people who were there doing the work she's still stretching for credit for from all of those years that she was just off in Florida. So the rest of this video is going to feature more interview clips from Tim, as well as clips from the phone call that I was able to have with the founder and director of the Tuggle Clinic, Mike Melancon. Full disclosure, Mike and I did talk about the book, and as Tim said in an earlier clip in this video, Mike wasn't a fan of it. He didn't find it to be very accurate. But again, I'm done talking about Ruth. I'm sick of her. So in my phone conversation with one of those people with letters behind their names, I asked Mike what he could tell me about what Daymon had said about the nuns in that quote. And he told me this story that I mentioned earlier about how Tuggle Clinic was founded in the first place.
It was a couple parents, or couple mothers. I'll just say it was a couple mothers of a couple guys who were infected with HIV, and they had talked to Sister Dorothy, and they said, hey, we'll start you a COVID pantry, and that, like I said, that's how it started. But it needed to be much more than that. But the Sisters of Mercy, they really came on later when I really got the food pantry going, and especially the clinic. That's when they really stepped up, because Sister Dorothy, she made things happen where, if I needed something very basic like toilet paper, she would call me and say, run by the hospital and I've got you a case of toilet paper, or hand sanitizer, or soap, stuff like Lysol. She would make sure we had things that we really needed. Now the big things we needed, exam table. She couldn't come up with that, but we were able to find that elsewhere. I tell people all the time, I go out and speak to a bunch of community-based organizations. I tell people we beg, borrowed, and sometimes we even stole it from somebody. But we were using it for a wonderful cause that's needed here.
So the Tuggle Shelby Clinic, also known as Hot Springs AIDS Resource, is still in operation today.
So, hold on a minute. And I know you're recording, but I've got somebody walking in here. I got to hand them something.
Of course, no worries at all.
Hey, come on. Sorry about that. But the organization, and I'm not saying we're a very financially sound organization, because we're not. We still struggle month to month like we have always. Now, we have grown enormously. We're a community-based organization, but we do not generate revenue. We're a true, and that's what I tell people, we're a true nonprofit organization providing services to not only our community. It started off just here in our community, in the Hot Springs area, but we have ventured out. We have people that will drive 200 miles to come see us because of the confidentiality of what they're living with, and wanting medical services and care that they receive there.
And it has had the same specialist in place pretty much since its foundation. Somebody who Mike speaks very highly of.
We have, I say, one of the best HIV doctors in the United States. And it's because he educated himself, and he went and learned and went and did some in-services, and he's been with us since day one.
And who he also, because Tuggle seems to be incredibly future-focused in a way that is such a relief after a certain memoir I'm not talking about anymore, Mike was able to tell us all about the plan that they have in place for what they're going to do once that specialist retires, because they already have a nurse practitioner there who has been shadowing Dr. Shelby for the last 3 years.
We already got somebody that's going to kind of take over, who's a nurse practitioner that's been shadowing him for almost 3 years now. Every clinic she's with us here, and she is wonderful.
The Tuggle Shelby Clinic is still overwhelmingly concerned with finding ways to help people access help, both for HIV as well as a Suboxone clinic that they run out of the same building. So they help not just the LGBT community, but also people who are outside of the LGBT community who are struggling with HIV, with addiction, with homelessness, with anything where they might need access to medication, to warm clothing, to the kinds of things that Mike was telling us that they're always looking for donations of. And they have to look for donations because they are a nonprofit, and they are what Mike refers to as a true nonprofit, meaning that they do not generate revenue.
We're a true community-based organization in a small town that I hate to say still has small minds in it. I've beaten my head with guess, the politics of this town here in Hot Springs. And I love Hot Springs. I mean, it's a great tourist town, and I love it. But, you know, I mean, receiving funding, you know, we don't receive any state funding. We don't receive any federal funding, strictly by the grants that I can try to write and secure in donations. You know, I mean, that's hard to deal with. You know, I said we're a small organization. There's only a few of us that operate this, but we're doing it a long line. We like what we do.
And still, they have seen great success at keeping their HIV patients alive, at prolonging the length of their life, but also greatly improving the quality of it as well. I think incredibly highly of Tuggle Clinic based on my conversation with Mike. As I've already mentioned, any ad revenue from this video will be donated to the Tuggle Clinic. I'm still too new to being officially monetized to actually have gotten a payout yet from YouTube, but once that's happening, I will make a post on my community tab, because you can also donate directly to the Tuggle Clinic if you wish. They have a Cash App. This was provided to me by Mike Melancon and is also where I will be donating once I have funds from this video. So I'm also foregoing my typical Patreon pitch to also just say, yeah, if you have some extra money and you would like to give it to somebody who is doing something good, or if you might have been fooled by that Ruth Coker Burks GoFundMe years ago, if you had seen it before you knew about her, maybe consider, if you have some money and you would like to give it to somebody who is doing important and meaningful work when it comes to AIDS in Hot Springs, Arkansas, that you consider giving it to the Tuggle Shelby Clinic. Our friend Tim Looper works with the Tuggle Shelby Clinic every year to put on a memorial for World AIDS Day, where they focus on both memorial and also treatment and prevention by providing testing. They've been doing this for years, including virtual ones during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 2021. And Tim Looper also has a ministry that he calls his Blessing Boxes. These are like little free food pantries that he has set up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, so that people who may not be able to so readily access services at judgmental churches in the area still have somewhere that they can walk up shame-free and find food and help. Tim accepts donations and fundraises for supplies on his Facebook, and you can find his Facebook linked in my description below. Talking to, getting to know, and getting to be in community with Tim Looper has been one of my favorite parts about making this video. I've already said it, I'll say it again, I love Tim.
I guarantee you this will go a lot further in life than that book ever did or ever will. Because you pretty much dissected it all together and just like, you know, and what was fun about that is watching you dissect it and then confronting me and just confirming it. I didn't have to dissect it for you. You're just like, I didn't have to place any bitterness or anger in you about it. You enveloped your own.
I was there. Yeah, it has been so amazing to have the chance to connect over this, especially because I know that this is something that I would have thought about for the rest of my life. I would have spent the rest of my life being like, nothing ever happened after that 2021 article from today about Ruth Coker Burks. I'm always sending it to people and I always say, I think this got buried when it came out. And I think Ruth knows how lucky she is that it got buried when it did, because that should have gone viral. Those original articles from Austin Gelder and Alexander Casella, they are amazing. They're so well done. They lay everything out so well. Nobody who I know who has shared articles about Ruth Coker Burks in the past or had shared like the Facebook post about her that goes viral, none of them saw that when it came out in 2021. And most of them say to me like, oh my God, I can't believe I saw this. This is crazy. Like, I think that's why she's keeping her mouth shut. I think she knows that she is lucky that that did not go viral then.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. I agree 100%. I mean, this definitely had to fall into somebody's lap that had the same fire.
So like I said much earlier in this video, I have spent many months working on this.
So you definitely, the universe definitely handed you something that they knew only you would get the fire to fight for. And that made me feel good because it helped me continue to not give up in a bitter manner. Well, you know, she won. She won. No, she didn't. No, she hasn't. No, she hasn't. I mean, if she's not supporting vocally this play or this musical, and she's not supporting anything and didn't show up for the biggest event of the year, what's wrong with that picture? I think she's realized she's defeated. She's defeated. But there's that one little percent of people who still want to just accept it for what they've heard. And you know, the fairy tales are like that, but that's just what they are. They're fairy tales. When there's no truth, it's a fairy tale. When it's the truth, it's called a documentary, and you have everything lined up in a row, and you have your facts straight. You dot your I's, you cross your T's, and at the end of the day, you have a good, solid, legal document of everything that you put in place. Something nobody else has been able to do on a permanent basis. And you've already accomplished that because the story went on popular for a few days, and then after everything was heaped on it, it just kind of. But your part, y'all's part in all of this, especially yours, of putting this all together, has given me the want to not even stop in here.
And while I do feel like this video serves as a pretty thorough deep dive into my particular scruples with Ruth Coker Burks, her book, and the narrative that she presents, it isn't a full picture of everything that happened in the gay community in Hot Springs, Arkansas, that still happens in the gay community in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
If you're going to be sued by the very people who entrusted you with that money, I would shut up too. I would not show up. I would not speak in public because I really wanted to go that day just to sit in that room to make her just uncomfortable. She might not have showed up because she thought that she would be heckled.
Well, she tweeted the other day, which is why I was like, oh, wow, was this Pride? She had tweeted the other day, I saw because I was going to look for screenshots I put in the video, and she shared like a meme that was talking about like reverse stalking somebody where you don't go somewhere because you know that they're going to be somewhere. And I wonder if that's about her Pride. Yeah, that's one of the most recent things she shared like 2 days ago.
I think we just confirmed what I was feeling then. And I'm not saying it was me, but it was somebody I know directly because it was HIV breakouts. So she had the perfect opportunity to talk about HIV and AIDS, and she turned it down. Just the fact that you said that right there's confirmation that it's everything. She's continuing to thrive on what little bit of gasoline keeps her going, but not enough to put her in the car to take her to the destination. Wow. Yeah. See, and she always does that. I know a con artist when I see one.
She tells on herself. She tells on herself. She lies like a little kid who doesn't think anybody else knows what lying is yet.
Because the health scares and all that. Yeah, she's got high blood pressure. She had a heart problem. So do I. What else you got? Come on. What else? What else is wrong with you? I take things for depression. I take psyche medicines. I can be a crazy individual as well, but I don't want to play that persona because that's not who we are in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
We didn't even talk about Little Rock, where one of the gay bars that was having drag fundraisers is actually still open and in existence. This is a very small lens on a very huge situation that I think could have taken me many more months to figure out how to cover if I had continued to give myself time. I mean, honestly, I'm sure there's even more information out there that could be and likely will be found about Ruth that I just haven't quite gotten my nails into deep enough to bring into this video. It seems like she was not hurting for that GoFundMe money that she grifted, even before getting more than enough to pay it back like she said she would from the book deal. But I'm not the one who's going to tell you about that. There are, I am actually 100% positive, other people currently looking into Ruth right now. And I don't say that because I'm in contact with any of them, just because I know. Many of them are in a Facebook group run by Robert Clintworth called 40 Young Men. And that is a private group that has tried and come up short for many years now to corroborate evidence to find more men buried in File Cemetery to get the number from that 5 people who can be identified up to the claim of 40 from Ruth's novel. As I mentioned earlier, Robert is the one who put up a banner at File Cemetery demanding to know where the AIDS monument was. And he has videos up on his public Facebook page that you can find and watch for yourself. Robert, like Tim, like the people in the Facebook group, like the journalists, were all here before Kit and I ever decided to make this video.
And here's the funny thing about Alex is in New York with the Today Show at the time. Because, I mean, if you're going to be that brave and go out there and put your future on the line for something like that, because that was a kick butt article if he did. I mean, he had it all lined up, and it was just kind of like, here's your cake, and then Opie gets to come along and put the icing on it and cut it up.
I'm not here breaking anything. I'm here because I felt like this was a situation that I found personally fascinating, and also because I felt like I wanted to amplify this. Because I felt like a lot of people who knew the story of the AIDS angel in passing would really like to know that they had been sold something that wasn't quite accurate. And I want to make sure that I am pointing out that this is a community thing. This is a group effort, because our community has always been part of how we've even survived at all. Our community's survival, its legacy, its history, and our ability to remember that history has never, ever centered around some mythic angel figure who comes in from the outside to either save us or just to kind of love on us until we pass away. What has sustained us while we've been alive, helped us to survive longer, and also actually helped to maintain the memory of our lost in a respectful way after the fact, has always been community and each other and solidarity. Things that have always and that we need to make sure must always exist within ourselves internally, within the way that we interact with each other, and not the way that we wait around for somebody from outside to take interest in us. So I guess, while it is very nice that some people from the outside of our community did want to help us during the AIDS crisis, I think we should be very skeptical when those people who did want to help us return later with increasingly outlandish claims. Most especially when those are ego-based claims, and when they already have a pretty easily observable pattern of behavior and track record. We don't have to be mean to them. We don't have to discourage outsiders from trying to help us. But I think we should be very careful not to let them make themselves into more than they are. And let's also make especially sure that we are keeping an eye on which stories we are telling and preserving. Because I want to make sure the ones that we're keeping are the ones from people who were actually there and going through it. I want to encourage other young gay people to actually reach out to older gay people who were there, who did have experiences that I know you're as curious as I am about.
But I'm in a different place than where I was, because at one time it was just like, anytime somebody would say something in positive, it was like a trigger. Why? How? And I got to thinking, no, that's not an example of what I need to be doing. What I want to do is say, hey, if you're really interested in the story, let's go do a little carpool and say 5 or 6, 10 of us. Let's go out to the cemetery that day, and I'll tell you the real story, and then we can all embellish that and let it be a part of our daily conversation. Eventually, that little small handful of doubters are going to go away.
I really want to do whatever I can to encourage you to try to make those relationships with people who are older than us, who do know more than us about the way that this all played out and what that felt like to live through. How they survived, how they sat with each other, how they organized to make sure that people were not left alone when they couldn't be. We have an infinite amount to learn from our elders, and we have a less than infinite amount of time in which we can do that. And that time is wasted by focusing on people like Ruth Coker Burks. If you agree with me on that and you liked this video and you would like a way to help support the work that the Tuggle Shelby Clinic is doing, but you, like me, minus potential ad revenue if this video does well, aren't able to toss money directly to them, but you would like an easy way to try to show some support to the Tuggle Shelby Clinic, engaging with this video by liking, commenting on it, or especially, and I typically would not ask you to do this with one of my videos, but if you can think of somebody who you think might share this, if you shared it with them and you said, hey, this lesbian is giving her money to an AIDS clinic and this is a video about somebody who pretends that AIDS clinic doesn't exist to make herself look good, maybe. Genuinely, literally just because of the fact that I am hoping to donate the ad revenue from this video, and that if other people watch it as far through as you did, we have a really good chance of coming up with an amount of money that would be actually helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you again to Tim and Mike for being so available and helpful and supportive while I was making this video. Thank you to Danny for sharing the lesbian sense of injustice that made me and Kit start off down this rabbit hole in the first place and replace that headstone. And thank you to all of my friends who have listened to me be like Charlie from Always Sunny with the pinboard about this whole situation for like 10 months now. And also thank you to all of my Nuance Corner friends who took a chance on this video, even if you weren't already familiar with the story of Ruth Coker Burks. And belated hi and welcome to the Nuance Corner to anybody who found me this way and is not yet familiar with my videos. It doesn't typically take me 10 months to make a video. Like, I made a lot of other videos in the interim in those 10 months. You might like some of them. But, okay. I think that's the video. Ruth Coker Burks is not an angel. We do not need an angel. What we need is each other, and we have always had that. And we will always have that, but we also always need to make sure that we are intentionally nurturing that. Happy Pride. I love you very much. Bye.